Welcome to yet another episode of the Hello Irlandia Show. Tonight we are live streaming a special Irish edition called Free Flowing Conversations. I am Aga Kubika.
And I'm Katarzyna Czekaj.
And we are your hosts tonight. We have prepared for you a great deal of new and vital information in a digestible and hopefully also entertaining form. And we are happy that you have decided to join us tonight. We think it will be well worth your time because we are going to talk about law in times of pandemics or how to tackle and challenge COVID-related restrictions, laws, and regulations.
Tonight, we welcome our guest, Martin Byrne, Barrister-at-Law at the Bar of Ireland, human rights lawyer, and member of World Freedom Alliance. Welcome to the Hello Irlandia Show, Martin.
Hello, it's Cześć, jak się masz? It's a pleasure to be here. I think I've surprised you with my little bit of Polish. It's very nice to be here. Yeah, my name is Martin Byrne. I'm a barrister-at-law. I'm currently practicing at the Bar of Ireland. I want to make it clear from the start, I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else. I'm not involved with the World Freedom Alliance any longer. I'm completely independent, and anything that I say tonight is my own opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone except myself, especially the Bar of Ireland. And I should also explain that I'm not providing any legal advice. So anything that I say tonight is just general information. And I always advise people or suggest that if they've got any specific questions or legal concerns, they should always seek independent legal advice. So I'm very happy to be here with you ladies this evening. And I'd say cześć to all the viewers out there. And I'm very happy to be able to answer your questions to the best of my ability. So fire away.
Very happy to have you.
Very happy to have you, indeed. Okay, so without much ado, I would like to go straight to the questions because our viewers have many of them, as you can imagine. And firstly, there is a lot of anxious people who are trying to get by in the level 5 lockdown, traveling to work and other, obviously working in their own workplaces where they are test PCR and potentially vaccines being pushed on them. Therefore, what info are we obliged to provide to the Garda, if any, when we are stopped, for instance, in our car, driving, well, wherever we are driving, whether it's to workplace or anywhere else, or on a train or a bus, traveling somewhere? Does that "my journey is lawful" or "am I arrested" mantra help, as a very well-known activist Ben Gilroy suggested, just to refer to kind of constitutional laws and not engage into further explanations? Yeah. What do you think about that approach?
Well, the approach that you take when you're stopped by the guards is very important, because you must remember that the guard on Garda Síochána, the Gardaí are obliged and to enforce the law, and that's their job. They're not out to intimidate people or to harass people. That's not what they're supposed to do. They're there to enforce the law. So it's normal and reasonable to expect people to cooperate with the guards. I know in current circumstances, a lot of people are very concerned, very fearful, and very annoyed over all of the restrictions, and that's perfectly understandable. We're living through very, very strange and bizarre times. We've never experienced anything like this before. And so it's normal for people to, for their tempers to get frayed and for their nerves to get a little bit edgy, so to speak. But if a person is stopped by the guards for whatever reason, in a car, for example, you're not, strictly speaking, you're not obliged to give your name and address, but I think it's reasonable that you should, because if you don't, you could get into trouble, and why not? Because the guard can ask for your driver's license, which would contain your name and address anyway. And to engage in behavior or responses that say, my journey is lawful, I think that could be asking for trouble. It's best to be reasonable, use your common sense, be courteous and polite, and always stay within the law, and don't give somebody a stick to beat you with. So if you're stopped while you're driving and the guards ask for your name and address, I think it's a good idea to give that. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay, in this case, next would be, and sorry for kind of being very particular, but these are the questions that we are getting from our viewers, because these are very, specific situations that they are finding themselves on a daily basis. How can we deal with the guard on a train or a bus traveling somewhere if we do not wear a mask? What info must we provide to them? Are we acting lawfully, having that self-declaration that we cannot wear the mask due to specific, let's say, medical exceptions? Does it still work according to the regulations? Can we be fined on the spot or thrown out of that particular means of transport? Is it lawful?
Is it law? Yes. Well, yeah. So if you're on public transport, it is a law that you must wear a face covering when you're on public transport, unless you've got a reasonable excuse. And I know I've read through the questions already, so I know that there will be a question coming up in relation to regulations or regulations laws. So yes, and I'll come to that later. I'll explain it in more detail. But it is a legal requirement. It is a regulation, which is a law, that you must wear a face covering while on public transport. And if you don't, you can get into trouble. And but if you've got a reasonable excuse, and the reasonable excuse is defined in the legislation, you might have a physical disability or a psychological disability, and that prevents you from wearing a face covering or a mask. So, for example, say a person has asthma and they've got a medical condition that makes it impossible for them to wear a face covering. So remember, under the law, you're just required to have a reasonable excuse. So it's reasonable. It's not, you must wear a face covering, full stop. It doesn't matter if you've got medical conditions or psychological conditions. No, the law doesn't say that. The law says that you must wear a face covering unless you've got a reasonable excuse. So if you have a reasonable excuse, then you are exempt from wearing a face covering while you're on public transport. Now, if you don't have a reasonable excuse, and there are a lot of people who have, just decided they're not going to follow the law, well, that's their choice. If they don't follow the law, they can get into trouble for doing that. For failing to follow the law, of course, and they would be subject to a fine, and those fines have fixed penalty notices have just come into force in recent days, and they could be fined. I think it's €100 or €80 in relation to masks. So that could be an on-the-spot fine. But the guards will use what they call the 4 E's, and they'll only seek to enforce the law as a last resort. Well, they should, in accordance with the Garda website, the policy is that they will only enforce the law as a last resort. So if people are reasonable, if you've got a reasonable excuse, you don't need to wear a face covering while on public transport. But it is a law, and I hope that answers that question fully. But a reasonable excuse is defined in the legislation.
Okay, I understand. So, getting on with next question.
Sure.
On what grounds can Garda stop you when you're actually walking, like on the street? Can you refuse to engage if it is on so-called COVID grounds, right? Is 5 kilometers restriction only a guideline or a law, since there is now on-the-spot fine of €100, with questions to ask the Garda, so they answer what questions to ask Garda, so they and let you go, how to disengage from that, that situation. If we are stopped on the streets, do we have to give our ID, their address, any personal info?
Mhm.
So how does that look? Stop on the street now.
Well, we're not in a situation yet where a person has to carry an ID card and get stopped just randomly or arbitrarily out in public and ask for their papers. That's something that people would have been familiar with back in the past, but not in Ireland. And name and address and contact details. Now, it depends on the situation very much. So if a person is seen to be away from home, I don't see any legal provisions for the Gardaí to look for their name and address if they're out just walking in public. But it has been announced that recently that the COVID enforcement measures are to be ramped up by the Gardaí now, and with fines that they have the power now to issue on the spot fines, €100. So when a guard is carrying out his or her duty, they can ask questions, and it's up to the person whether they want to be cooperative or not. And if you're not cooperative, you could be asking for trouble. But I don't see any provisions where the guards can ask for the name and address. But it is reasonable to suspect that they may ask for a name and address if the guard has reason to suspect that that person is more than 5 kilometers from home because they're investigating the law. But I think people should use their common sense in situations. Always stay on the right side of the law. Otherwise, in order to avoid getting into trouble, because people found in breach of these level 5 restrictions, they face a fine of €100. So that's not something that people want to suffer. It's but that's where we are at the moment. So there are reasonable.
Yeah, we probably will. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just to conclude on that there are lots of reasonable excuses set out in the legislation that provide what they call reasonable grounds for leaving the home. I know this sounds bizarre, even just saying this as an advocate for human rights. It seems strange that we have to give reasonable excuses for going away from our home, but we're living through very bizarre times at the moment, and these are legal requirements. So unfortunately, until such times as the legislation is removed, this is the situation people find themselves in. But there are lots of reasonable excuses for leaving home, for exercise within 5 kilometers, for going to the shop, for carrying out certain activities, going to a funeral and so on, going to work. And there are many reasonable excuses set out in the legislation. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, it is very helpful. We can later on talk about the whole sense of that whole situation, because that's quite another, I guess, discussion. Many people are wondering which restrictions are still regulations and formally do not supersede the law. So we know that they are both bills and statutory instruments related to COVID. Do any of those disagree with Constitution, or, for instance, rights enshrined in the constitutions, our rights. Can we argue that the regulations are not law and therefore they are not valid? If any of the restrictions and penalties are already a law, even if in a specific frame time, and do we have to obey? So essentially, I think the question is about how is it in relation to the Constitution, and does it have any stance as a law if it is completely in disagreement with the Constitution, for instance, or our liberties? So,
well, that's a situation. That's a question that I get asked in practice quite a lot, and people people that I meet and that I've met over the last 9 months or so, particularly since the beginning of the crisis, people are asking me that similar question. Constitutional rights. I suppose now is a good time to discuss constitutional rights first of all, and where they are, at what level they are in the great scheme of things in respect of law. So your constitutional rights are rights that are recognized and protected by the Constitution. And the Constitution is essentially a code of conduct for the government and for the nation to follow. And people have been hoodwinked into believing that a government give us our rights, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We have our rights, our human rights, our fundamental rights, by the very fact that we're born. And if you're religious, if you believe in a God, then God gave you your rights. You were born with those rights. They're more properly called human attributes. They're not something that a government gives us. However, those rights, there are many fundamental rights, as I'm sure you're aware, and your viewers will be aware. For example, my right to freedom of expression, and I have a right to privacy, and you have a right to your reputation and your good name. You have a right to education, a right to earn a livelihood, a right to liberty and freedom, and so on, a right to bodily integrity. There are many fundamental rights that are recognized, not given, they're recognized and protected by a constitution. So in life is very complex, as we all know, but in life, sometimes one person's fundamental right can come into conflict with a different fundamental right belonging to another person. For example, my right to freedom of expression ends where your right to your good name and reputation begins. So it's normal, perfectly acceptable and normal for fundamental rights to be competing with each other on a daily basis, all the time. So the job, and it's a very tough job for the courts and for a government to do, to create or try to create a balance so that people's rights are respected and balanced. So whenever governments make legislation or make a law, the governments have been given the power to make law under the Constitution. And that's why we've got this concept called a legislature. So in Ireland, we've got the legislature, which consists of the Dáil, Parliament, and the Seanad, or the Senate. And it's the same in many countries throughout the world, in democracies. So we'd have a parliament, like a lower house, and then an upper house called the Senate. So those two houses, or those two parts of government, have been given the power under the Constitution to create law, and that's what they do through a democratic process. And their job is to create balance with the law. So whenever they're creating a law that seeks to or tries to infringe upon or limit our fundamental rights, the government has an obligation to be proportionate. They must comply with the principle of proportionality. And so whenever law comes into being, if it's not proportionate, then that law could be struck down by a court if somebody wanted to challenge it, or it could be overturned eventually. But whenever a government, the legislature, that part of the government that makes laws, whenever they make a law, it must be proportionate and impose upon fundamental rights to the least degree possible. So, coming back to your question about regulations, well, there are different levels of law. Right up at the top, you've got the Constitution, which protects the fundamental rights, or the human rights or attributes that we have because we're born. That's right at the top. Then underneath the Constitution, you've got the legislature. It creates the laws. It creates acts of Parliament. And underneath that, that's called primary legislation. And that can be an act of Parliament. Another name for that is a piece of legislation, primary legislation, or a statute. Then underneath that again, so Constitution, the acts of Parliament, and then underneath that you've got what's called secondary legislation. So you've got primary legislation and then secondary legislation. And secondary legislation is still law, and it is those statutory instruments that you see, the Minister for Health, for example, during this crisis. The Minister for Health is making regulations that he is allowed to make because he's been given the power to make those regulations as a result of primary legislation. So the answer to the question, is a regulation a law? It is. It is a law. Many people don't like the regulations. Many people object to the regulations, but they're still a law until they have been repealed or until they've been struck down by a court. So if somebody doesn't like that law, they can challenge that law in a court and try to have that law struck down or wiped out or overturned. But until such times as regulations have been A, repealed, or B, struck down by a court, or declared unconstitutional by a court, then it is a law. So we're obliged to follow the law, and if we don't, we can get into trouble. So yeah, I hope that's a very long answer to that question, but I hope that sheds some light and gives some information for your viewers in relation to.
So to summarize it shortly, until the law is struck down, we have to follow. We can't just individually decide that we won't follow because there will be legal consequences. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. If you don't, if I don't like the 100-kilometer speed limit on the main road, and I decide to hell with that, my car can go at 200 kilometers per hour. I'm going to go at 200 kilometers per hour because I want to get from A to B as quickly as possible. And I don't like the speed. If I don't like the speed limit and I'm stopped and I'm caught on a camera or a radar or whatever, I'm going to suffer the consequences. Now, yeah, I'm free, to break that if I don't like the law. But if I break the law, then and I'm caught, then I will suffer the consequences.
Yeah, this is understandable, but the issue lies here with the new COVID regulations, which many people feel like they are infringing on their birthright rights, or the God-given rights, as you put it, right? So yeah, this is where the issue.
I don't like it. I don't think anybody likes those regulations, but it's not up to me. If I don't like it and I decide, well, I'm not going to comply with that, I'm running the risk that I'm going to get into trouble. So it's as simple as that. Yes, a lot of people are very, very annoyed, and rightly so, because this is really the biggest infringement on our fundamental rights in history. It's never been done before. These lockdowns, even the term lockdown comes from prison terminology. So there's so many people out there don't like it, but the fact is, what we're faced with is that we have a government, and the government has been given the power to make laws under the Constitution, and that's what they're doing. We may not agree with it, we may not like it, but it is the law until it's repealed by the government or until it's declared unconstitutional by a court. So if people don't like the law, then they can bring a challenge to court and do their best to have that law overturned.
Understood.
Okay, so I would have I would have a question that actually was supposed to be asked a bit later on,
Sure.
but you mentioned the concept of the laws kind of competing with each other, and I suppose the greater good is in a way that kind of law that is being used. So how much of greater good can be pushed in imposing all those restrictions on our civil liberties in the situation that, depending on the age and risk group, the survival rate for COVID-19 is between 99 roughly and 99.9%. So essentially, we're coming back to the question about the proportionality, because to give you, for instance, just to fill in one more piece that is maybe a little bit drastic, but where do we stop being very restrictive? Because as we know, those restrictions are going tighter and tighter and tighter. So the kind of very extreme example of the law that used to be in one country was that, for instance, if you steal just a little bit of grain, you would end up in a gulag. That was a law as well. But we know that was essentially a crime against humanity, absolutely horrific thing to do, and people were dying in millions because of hunger, partly because of those laws. So essentially, how we tackle this situation, because proportionality, as somebody said in the comments, is out the window right now.
It seems like everything has been turned on its head. And I have had the opportunity and the privilege of being able to speak to lawyers and scientists all over the world, and I continue to do so. And, it's the same. People are feeling the same in so many countries. There are a lot of people who really disagree with what's happening in terms of the law and the restrictions placed on fundamental rights and freedoms. And they talk about this notion of the greater good. Well, that's an argument that can be used. The greater good, but I'm not sure if that argument will stand up in court if a challenge was brought to court. Is this imposition or restriction that's been placed on fundamental rights and freedoms all across Europe and across many of the countries in the developed world, is it for the greater good? Now that's open to debate, because there is a lot of evidence that I've been made aware of and that I've seen, and a lot of people, experts, talking about the lockdown creating more harm than benefit. And when you boil it down to its essence, the infection fatality rate, you'll hear that described a lot. What is the actual risk posed by the disease? And now, I'm not a medical expert, and I'm not seeking to give medical advice because I'm not qualified to give that. But I've listened to experts who have a different perspective and a different viewpoint than many in the mainstream, and they're at opposing ends. One side is saying one thing, another side is saying the other, and the public is caught in the middle, and they don't know what to do. They're almost in a spell of fear, and in many respects, the other side, the alternative arguments, are being suppressed for some reason through censorship, which I find shocking, actually, that there should be censorship, especially at a time like this, because when there's a public health crisis, one would imagine that all sides should be listened to, And all options should be explored rather than just one side. Because there's an old saying, beware the man who reads just the one book. And so, I think it's very important, just from a balance point of view, to create balance and to ensure that all sides are heard. And there are many world-renowned experts, such as Professor Sunetra Gupta, Professor Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Michael Norcross, I'm not sure of his surname, but there's great Barrington Declaration, and so many experts that have signed up to that who are seeking to promote an alternative to these very serious infringements on our fundamental rights and freedoms because of lockdown. Now, I'm not saying, I don't know, because I'm not an expert. I can't say whether lockdown is the right thing or not. I can have my own opinion about that, but I'm not qualified to say whether it's right or wrong. But from my observation, I'm saying that there's an argument out there on the other side that's been suppressed through censorship. And I think that as a human rights advocate, that is wrong. It's actually a breach of the fundamental right to freedom of expression, which I can explain simply. We have a fundamental right to freedom of expression, which is one of the most important rights of all, because so many of our other fundamental rights depend upon our right to freedom of expression. And freedom of expression is like a bird. And we all know that a bird needs two wings to fly, and a bird never flew on one wing. So where am I going with that? Well, it's easy when I explain further. Most people think that the right to freedom of expression means that I'm allowed to say whatever I want to say, within reason, of course. I can't defame somebody, that would be wrong. But I have a right to freely express myself. But what most people don't realize or understand is that the right to freedom of expression also includes the right to receive information. So it's like the bird with two wings. So when there is so much censorship, when there's any censorship, in fact, that's like cutting off one of the wings on that bird, on our freedom of expression. Our full right has not been respected. So we only hear one side of the story, and that's not a vindication or protection of the right to freedom of expression. And unfortunately, and I've seen this from personal experience, and I've encountered it in my practice, that so many alternative viewpoints expressed by world-renowned doctors and scientists and experts have been censored. And that, in my opinion, as a lawyer, is a breach or a violation of your right to your freedom of expression, the right to receive information, which is guaranteed and protected under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. It's also protected under our Constitution, the right to communicate, but it's protected under the European Convention as well. So it's recognized as a fundamental right. So where was I going with that? You were talking also in relation to the greater good. Yeah. So is it balanced? Is what's happening to our society balanced? When we look around, I encounter it every week in my practice. I encounter people who are at their wits' end because they're losing their jobs. We all heard of people who are suffering because they're going to lose their job, or their business is crashing. They don't know how they're going to survive this year or for the next 6 months, never mind for the rest of the year. And is it proportional? Well, we all have opinions, each and every one of us, me included. And in my humble opinion, as I said, I'm not qualified to say whether lockdowns are right or wrong, but in my opinion, and I think there's a better way, and there should be a better way, and it would be better, in my humble opinion, to open this whole topic up to debate and to have full transparency rather than secrecy and so on, and listen to alternative viewpoints and then decide based on expert reports and opinions from all sides of what is the best approach to take. Now, for example, the greater good. I've heard Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is a world-renowned environmental lawyer, very respected lawyer, and he said recently that there are 10,000 children in Africa are dying every month because of the lockdown and the measures imposed. Now, if there were 10,000 children dying every month in any of the developed countries, in the Western countries, do you think that lockdowns would be allowed to continue for a further week? But yet, now I haven't seen the evidence, but I respect my colleague Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s position that he's not going to put out information in respect of that unless he's seen the evidence. Now, I haven't seen the evidence, and people can look this up for themselves. But added on to that, we've got Governor Cuomo in New York just announced the other day that he thinks that the lockdowns the cost is not worth the benefit, or words to that effect. Now, people can look that up as well, what he said. So maybe there is a better way, and I think to find out if there is a better way for the greater good, that it would be better that the right to freedom of expression is respected, and that all sides in an argument get their debate. Now, that's one of the beauties about the law and the courts, ladies and viewers. The courts are wonderful because in our Western court system, there's a principle called audi alterum partem, and it's a Latin phrase, and it means hear both sides. So when you go into a court, one side will not be suppressed to the benefit of the other side. Both sides get to have their say, and then a court or a judge or judges will make a decision based on the arguments from both sides. So I can't see why that can't work without having to go to court. Why, for the greater good of society, that all sides of an argument are heard and listened to, and a decision is reached through the democratic process, rather than imposing these severe restrictions on society. So I hope that sheds some light in relation to the question that you've asked. But our constitutional rights, our fundamental rights, are very, very valuable and should be respected, even in times of significant crisis. Like, we haven't experienced this before, and our rights haven't been infringed upon or violated to this degree ever in Western society ever before.
Yes. Yes, I have actually a follow-up question, because you mentioned about the lack of debate, and I think I also have some more, questions about, since we already touched that issue. Do you have, apart from challenging in the courts, which, well, we may or may not have the luck, because I'm not sure whether the courts are not kind of a part of society in a way that, if, for instance, the majority of the society believe that this is such a drastic situation that we need to hold those restrictions, maybe that may influence as well the view of a judge, let's say, because he will be treating the lockdown and dangers of the virus maybe a little bit too seriously. Well, I did come across such an opinion from another lawyer that's some kind of challenge overall in the courts, that the awareness has to change not only in the society but in the courts as well, among people who actually serve the duty in there. So that's one thing. And essentially, apart from courts, do you have any other tool to force the elites on the top to actually get that debate going? Be it some kind of petition, because I believe there was quite a lot of petition already, being signed, and that's not somehow, getting any attention. A lot of letters from GPs, even here locally, not only the Barrington Declaration, but our local initiatives from various organizations, and nothing is happening. So do we have any other tool? Like, is there any tool to actually say, "Oh, we are here and we are not being listened"? You have to listen to us.
Yeah. Well, that's the difficulty that we're facing now. As a lawyer, all I can speak to is the law and the procedures or the processes that are available using the law. And people can bring a challenge to court and try and get a victory in that way. And like you said, there seems to be a prevailing sense of dread well, as far as a lot of people are concerned. Many other people are saying, no, this can't possibly be as bad as they're saying. And a lot of lawyers are saying it as well. I know I've been in contact with a lot of lawyers around the world. And for example, Dr. Rainer Fulmich is bringing a claim, first of all, a defamation claim in Germany on behalf of Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg. And also he intends to bring a class action claim in the United States and challenging the PCR test. Now, I've met and spoken with a lot of scientific experts, and I continue to do on an ongoing basis. And they're saying there's a lot of talk about the PCR test not been fit for purpose, depending on how it's used, and it's been used to I've heard people say it's been used to generate fear. Now, well, why would anybody want to do that? And why are people saying that? Well, I think it's because the PCR test, as far to the best of my knowledge from listening to the experts, is not actually a test at all. And remember, people don't take my word for it. I'm just saying this from what I've heard from listening to scientific experts. And I'm not purporting or professing to be an expert on this particular issue. I'm just raising this in relation to the case numbers. And I think there's a lot of confusion created in the minds of the general public, and which is concerning because confusion can lead to fear. And there's confusion over the terminology used, because the media and the governments seem to be using the words cases, COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 interchangeably, and PCR tests and so on to test for cases. But I have it on good authority that I understand that a case is when somebody is sick and showing symptoms. A case is actually a diagnosed illness, as far as I know. I'm open to correction, and I would welcome if somebody would correct me on that and to shine some light on that. But there's a virus and there's a disease, and I understand that the PCR tool is used to check for the presence of a fragment of a virus. But the test results are then declared to be cases, which I think that's the challenge, and I think that's what Dr. Rainer Fulmich is challenging, and he would be of the view in his case that the PCR test is meaningless, and that's the position that he's taking. I know there are other challenges in the United States as well, running on along the same lines, but there tends to be, because of this increased number of cases, people think that it's the plague that we're faced with, and it tends to generate a tremendous amount of fear. But I'd like to know, and I'd like that explored and debated fully with people from all sides of the argument, not just one side of the argument. I'd like to see people talking about, sharing their views and their scientific views in respect of the other side, like the Great Barrington Declaration people. I'd like to have them all in a room to see and to clarify and to bring some, to remove some of the fear, perhaps, because fear once fear walks through the door, reason jumps out through the window, and we can move into a situation where people they're not thinking clearly or rationally. They're looking at things through a blinkered perspective, and I think that's, in general, that's not for the common good. I think we've all heard stories. I've heard clients say to me that they were out for a walk and they met somebody, and that other person could have been just overcome with fear and maybe want to jump out of the way. They don't want to come too close to another person. And it's very strange that we're living in a situation where things like that are happening. People are so afraid. But I think there's another expert out there called Ivor Cummins, and he presents a lot of reports on YouTube. I've watched those reports, and it's very educational. And he uses the data to present, his viewpoint in relation to the cases. And I think one of the main indicators of concern should be the overall mortality rather than case numbers. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes. So I just wanted to refer quickly, because you mentioned one case that is now being challenged. There is another case that already happened in Portugal, and that was actually addressing the PCR test as just the only reason for, I think, some tourists being held in under the quarantine for quite a long time. So can we use, I know this is a different different jurisdiction and also different kind of law. We know that the continent is based on codexes, essentially, not on a common law. But can we actually use that precedence already while doing something here in courts? Would that be useful?
The Portuguese case does not. Well, we operate. First of all, I should clarify for your viewers. We operate under the classic English common law system, and of course the Irish, anywhere where the British Empire had a base or established itself throughout the world, all of those countries would be known as common law jurisdictions. And of course, in Ireland, we started off with the English common law, and then we developed our own system based upon that, but we still rely a lot upon many different English decisions, because England the United Kingdom is a massive country in terms of population, and there would be a tremendous body of case law there that we could rely upon to provide us with what we call persuasive authority. But the way that it works, we've got what's called the doctrine of precedent in Ireland. And that means that if you've got a case, a similar case in the future that has similar facts to a case that was heard in the past, you can apply the reasoning that was used in that earlier case in order to decide upon the case that's before you today. And so we follow earlier decisions, and we also follow the decisions from higher courts. So a lower court, for example, a circuit court, or would be obliged to follow decisions from the High Court, and the High Court would be obliged to follow decisions from the Supreme Court, and so on. So we've got this doctrine of precedent in our common law system. And whenever you go into court and you want to make an argument, in order to support your argument, you're relying upon your facts and the law. So you could say, these are the facts, Judge, and I'm going to rely on this decision of the Supreme Court in 1989, and where the court said X, Y, and Z. So you would be relying upon that precedent. But unfortunately, for people who would want to challenge the PCR test, for example, has been unreliable or meaningless, as some people say, and at the other side would say, no, it's the gold standard. This is the gold standard test. There's nothing better. That would be an argument on one side, and the other side is saying, no, it's not. It's meaningless. So let's say that the side that's saying, no, this is meaningless. The test is no good. It's not a proper test. and want to rely upon the decision of the Court of Appeal in Portugal. Now, that doesn't work in Ireland, because the Irish courts are not obliged to follow the decisions of European courts. Now, it could be useful as what we call persuasive authority. So if there are no other decisions like that in Ireland, then the court might look at that decision and look at what the judges or judges said in that decision, and might use that in order to reach a decision in a case here. So that case doesn't assist us greatly in Ireland one way or another. But I should also say as well, the case, I think, related to a criminal matter. So it wouldn't really assist people to a great degree here in Ireland. The decision that the PCR test wasn't sufficient, because in order to deprive somebody of their liberty in terms of criminal, in the context of criminal proceedings, you must prove something beyond reasonable doubt. And I think, just from recollection, that decision, one of the reasons the court decided that the PCR test was unreliable was because it wasn't reliable enough to warrant a determination of beyond reasonable doubt in order to deprive those tourists of their liberty. So there are a number of issues with that. But it'll be interesting to see how Rainer Fulmich fares out. And there are a number of cases that Tom Renz, who I know in Ohio in the United States, is bringing a number of challenges over there. And then we've got Rocco Galati as well. But I don't think I don't think Rocco Galati in Canada, constitutional lawyer in Ontario, I don't think his case relates to the PCR test. But there are some cases coming down the tracks. But the legal process is quite slow, and I know that people are very frustrated at the moment. So the sooner this entire situation is resolved, the better for everyone.
So the better, yes. Okay, so in this case, maybe I'll just go to more specific questions. How can we fight in the workplace or school, for that matter, the environment to work if we have a condition and a letter from our GP, which is kind of a rare thing from what I hear? Should it be sufficient? What about someone who does not have a specific condition but still does not want to be affected by lack of sufficient oxygen? Can we fight, for instance, by requesting health and safety assessment? Is there any other argument that we can use? And that health and safety assessment, I think I was inspired by someone coming up with this. But essentially, we know that in workplaces or even schools anywhere, the quality of air is, required to be such and such, in particular in relation to the level of CO2. Now, obviously, if you have something on your face, that changes the quality of the air that you breathe in quite significantly. So should that kind of health assessment shouldn't not be, like an obvious thing to do before you even, enforce that kind of law, for instance, for kids at school?
Yeah, of course. And I can speak with authority on this particular point, because over the last couple of years, I've done so many personal injuries cases, and I'm always aware, and it's always at the forefront of my mind, the issue of liability. And especially it can be in the workplace, it could be a road traffic accident, it could be an accident in a school. I've done many of those, and at the workplace. So there are a number of issues that arise. Was it foreseeable that the harm would be caused? Was there a risk assessment carried out? And in my previous life, I should have said at the start that before I became a barrister, before I qualified in law, I was a production and quality assurance manager. I was in business, in the manufacturing and engineering business in Ireland for over 20 years. And So I can speak with authority from my past experience as a former manager, and I was a director at one stage. So, and I was also a health and safety officer in that company for a period of time. So I know the importance of having a safety statement and carrying out risk assessments in the workplace. But this goes also for schools. And I'll come to the point as well where you mentioned about putting masks on or forcing masks upon children at school. I've got my own personal opinion about that. And I'll say it because I've said it before and I'm on record for saying it. But and the reason why I formed that opinion was based on expert advice. There's a lady, a Harley Street neurologist who I had the opportunity to meet on a number of occasions when I traveled across Europe and meeting various lawyers and scientific experts and so on. And I had the opportunity to meet a wonderful lady called Dr. Margareta Gries-Brisson. And she's a Harley Street neurologist. She practices, I believe, in London, of course, Harley Street in London. And she practices also in Germany. So I've met her in different countries. I've met her in Frankfurt in Germany and Stockholm in Sweden and Copenhagen, Denmark. And the first time I met her, I asked her about what is her opinion in relation to masks and so on, because I was concerned about the issue of because in my practice, the people talking about children being forced to wear masks, and one of my clients, obviously I can't go into a lot of detail because of confidentiality, but one of my clients was very concerned about their child who was returning to school last September, and the child had asthma, and my client wanted to know, what could be done in relation to, getting an exemption and so on. And this particular person had great difficulty in getting an exemption because apparently their GP wouldn't provide it, which was quite strange, because the GP knew that the medical background of the child in question. And so there were a number of, I've encountered this a lot actually in my practice, people asking for assistance, legal assistance in that regard. So I asked Dr. Gries-Brisson, what is her opinion in relation to masks? Because I'd seen a video that she posted in German. Now, I don't speak German, a couple of words here and there, but there was an English translation, which was very helpful. And I asked her, what's the most powerful evidence that she has to say that forcing children to wear masks is harmful? How would she support that argument? And she said quite emphatically, very strongly, what evidence do you need to prove to you that it's dangerous to jump out of a helicopter from a height? And I did an interview with her, and I'd asked questions with doctors for open debate from Belgium and Dr. Margareta Gries-Brisson. And that video is available, I believe, on YouTube, where I discussed the legal issues and the liability issues of masks on children at school. So to clarify one point, when it was announced back last summer that children should wear masks at school, it wasn't law. It was simply a guideline. And I think just going back to what we were saying earlier on about regulations and so on, a regulation is a law because a regulation is made by a minister in accordance with a power that he or she has been given under primary legislation. But guidelines, they are not law. A guideline is a guideline. A piece of advice is a piece of advice. It's not the law. And a person can decide whether to follow the advice or the guidelines if they want. It's not law. So in terms of forcing children to wear masks at school, that was not the law. It was a guideline given by the Department of Education and Skills Now, I'm open to correction. I don't think it's been changed since then, but it was along the lines as follows. Children should be asked, all children should be asked to wear face coverings at school. And that was it. So then it progressed. Then the children were forced to wear masks. So my opinion as a lawyer, I think that anything that has the potential and it can be demonstrated that that thing that you're forcing somebody to do it poses a risk, it constitutes a hazard, or it can be shown that it causes harm, constitutes child abuse. Now, Dr. Margareta, I based that my opinion on the words, the advice of experts such as Dr. Margareta Griesbazon, and in her opinion, it's child abuse. And I think that we owe a duty, and we have an obligation as adults in society to protect our children and to ensure that our children are not, there are no risks posed to our children, from something that it can be shown to cause harm. And I'm also aware of the evidence. There's a tremendous body of evidence that indicates that wearing masks can cause harm. And as you said just yourself a few moments ago, put anything over your face and you can be deprived, anything that deprives you of oxygen for an extended period, particularly an extended period of time.
Yeah.
Cannot really good. Yeah. So, yeah.
Could I just jump with a question from the viewer?
Yeah, because I just wanted to clarify this one.
Okay.
Aga, just
Sure.
1 moment.
Sure.
This one, this question, because it was schools and workplaces. So for schools, I'd take parents should just put some kind of notice on liability. Point out that these are just the guidelines, and potentially if somebody still has a problem with understanding, bring maybe a couple of expert opinions, in the sense that the one that you mentioned, maybe the one that will for the workplace, though, it will be very justifiable to just ask first, please give me the health and safety assessment before you actually start, forcing me into wearing the mask. Would that be the right course of action? Just, briefly, so we have it clarified.
People can take that course of action if they want, but if a person, there are a number of different situations. Let's say a person has a problem, physical or psychological difficulty, that makes it impossible for them or makes it a problem for them to wear a face covering. And that person has what can be regarded as a disability. Let's say the person has a breathing difficulty, that can constitute a disability for the equality legislation. So let's say the employer decides, no, a blanket decision, all employees, if I'm in my former career, if I decided, no, all of my employees are going to wear masks. I don't care. They're all going to wear masks. Now, I don't care about Joe or Peter. They've got breathing problems, or they've suffer from PTSD, or they suffer from claustrophobia, or some other psychological condition. I don't care about them. Everybody has to wear a mask. Well, then I'm exposing myself to liability for breaching equality legislation, for discriminating against somebody with a disability. So if I was an employer, and I can speak from my past experience and as a qualified practicing barrister, it would be very important to make sure that when you're seeking, they're doing their best. They want to ensure that health and safety is catered for, and all of the guidelines are followed, and the legal requirements, the obligations to provide a safe place of work is complied with. You want to make sure when you're doing that as an employer that you're not breaking the law somewhere else, because you can be exposed to a claim in the Workplace Relations Commission or worse. So let's say, and I encountered this regularly in my practice, where clients have been threatened I had one client recently that showed up to work, and that person had a genuine medical exemption, and the employer told that person that unless they leave the premises now, that they were going to call the guards. So that person was sent home just arbitrarily sent home from work like that, which is a clear case of discrimination against somebody with a disability. So if it goes to the extreme and somebody is fired from their job because they cannot wear a mask, because they've got a disability, well, then that person would have a right to redress, to bring a claim against their employer perhaps for unfair dismissal, and they can do that by filing a complaint with the Workplace Relations Commission. And they don't need to have legal assistance to do that. It's preferable if they do, of course, because it can be a complicated process for a lot of people. But if an employee is in a difficulty, in a situation like I'm encountering that every week, people are in need of help, and so, and it's because of the fear. Like an employer has an obligation to provide a safe place of work. That's clear, but they also have an obligation to comply with other pieces of law, such as the Employment Equality Acts, and to ensure that they respect people who have disabilities. It doesn't matter, they cannot discriminate against somebody on any of the 9 grounds set out in legislation, whether it's your race, whether it's whatever country you come from, the color of your skin, your religion, your gender, or if you've got a disability. It's discrimination. So if a person is faced with a situation like that, I would recommend that they always seek independent legal advice, and get, in relation to their own specific circumstances. And they might find that they would have a right to make a claim and protect their rights, because an employer is obliged to follow all of the law, not just one particular piece of law or a piece of guidance, which doesn't supersede or take precedence over primary legislation, such as employment equality acts.
So, since we are
Aga,
talking about the masks, Dagmara is asking, why can't I wear a visor instead of a mask? It's still a face covering. So why did my manager told me I cannot wear a visor? It has to be a mask. Is this legal? And then Diana says the government changed the definition for a face covering in recent statutory instrument making. Visors not appropriate face coverings. Can you confirm that? Is that correct?
That's correct. The definition was changed recently before Christmas. So it was initially, when they brought the regulations out at the start, it was a face covering could have been anything that covers your nose and mouth. So it could have been one of those shields, those plastic things, but not anymore. But what I would say, that anybody who cannot wear a mask because of an underlying condition, if they've got a reasonable excuse or disability, then their employer is obliged to make reasonable accommodation for that person. They must do something. They must go out of their way to a reasonable extent to make the workplace suitable to accommodate that person's disability.
How would you communicate it to your employer? Because I assume employers, most of them are just unaware of that fact, and if the employee tries to argue, they may take it the wrong way. So how would you communicate it?
Well, to communicate it, there are many ways of communication, and over my short but colorful life, I've had a lot of experience in communication. And back in my earlier years, when I was very young, I could have been quite confrontational in my approach. And I've always found, through experience, I've found that that's not the best way to deal with people. There's somebody wise once said, if you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive. So always approach things sensibly, calmly, to the best of your ability. and try to resolve the situation amicably, in a friendly manner. And if that doesn't work, turn up the heat if you have to, but always approach things in a rational, reasonable, and sensible way. In my life experience, that's just from my life experience. And I've found that approach can work in the law as well. But we, us barristers, we go into court, we could drink each other's blood, when we're fighting in court, but it's, sometimes you can resolve a dispute by taking a sensible approach, putting down the sword. Don't go in with the sword, first of all. Be ready for a fight, but see if a sensible, reasonable, amicable approach will work. And in the legal profession, the judges will be very happy if you do that and seek to resolve a dispute as early as possible, which is always a good thing to do. And and I should say as well, so that if people run into difficulty at work, the first thing you don't want to say to your employer, look, if you don't respect my fundamental constitutional rights that were given to me by God, well, I'm going to take you to court and I'm going to sue you. So that's not going to work out very well. So approach it. My advice would be to approach it reasonably and say, look, I've got this difficulty. I greatly appreciate if you would respect my privacy here. So maybe we could speak in private about this, and go somewhere in private and just explain your situation. You don't have to tell them what your underlying condition is. For example, I encountered a client recently who was sexually abused in their childhood. And that person, the perpetrator of that horrendous and heinous crime, stuffed a T-shirt into this person's face. And anybody with a bit of common sense would realize that poor individual could develop a psychological problem or a PTSD or something like that. Now, I'm not medically qualified, so I can't say for sure, but I know from speaking with psychological experts that this is an issue, and problems in later life can develop because of what's happened or traumas that we experienced in our childhood. So that individual could not wear a mask. So it's not fair for an employer to ask, well, why can't you wear a mask? What is your medical condition? It's none of their business. Tell them to take a long walk on a short pier, or politely say, well, I'm sorry, it's really none of your business. You'll know your employer best yourself, but it's not something that they're entitled to know. You could, if you want to. Some people do. Some people do say, well, look, I've got asthma. I simply cannot wear a mask. I'll fall over. I've got PTSD. Or I was abused as a child and I simply cannot do it. I just go into this panic attack mode. I can't, but the employer has no right to know what your underlying condition is. And anybody that obtains a medical exemption letter from a GP, they should always tell their GP, do not disclose what my medical condition is on that letter. The extent of the wording on a letter should be, for medical reasons, Mary or Peter is unable to wear a mask, full stop. No other details, because your personal health data is very specific health data, and it's a special form of personal data that has a very high level of protection under the GDPR. You can, if you want, by all means, you have a right to disclose that information if you want, but it's none of their business. So if you're confronted with a problem at work, try to resolve it amicably and friendly, as friendly as possible. But if you're met with discrimination or harassment or abuse, you have every right to make a complaint and to seek legal assistance if you want to, and to go to the Workplace Relations Commission website, workplacerelations.ie. It provides a lot of very helpful information there that can give people some guidance in relation to protecting their rights in the workplace. There's also a great website called the Irish human rights. There's what is it? The ICHREEEC. I can't remember exactly the full details. It's the Human Rights Commission, Irish Equality and Human Rights and Equality Commission. I beg your pardon. It's a bit of a tongue twister. So that website, you can visit that, and they give a lot of guidance on equality issues and your fundamental rights. So it's always good to visit that if you want to get some information.
Does the same rule apply? Does
Right.
the same rule applies though to the PCR testing at workplace? It's just the following question.
Yeah, the PCR work, I've encountered that one as well in my practice. And well, firstly, there's competing rights at play there with that particular issue. And a person can refuse any kind of medical intervention because we've got a right to bodily integrity and we've got a right to personal autonomy. So a test or any kind of medical procedure cannot be forced upon somebody against their will. Now, there are potential issues with this particular topic. It's complex legal issues that I don't really want to get into now because it's very complex, but there are all kinds of issues that can arise, including if somebody is coerced into undergoing any kind of medical intervention. There is a medical paper from Oxford, the Oxford Medical Journal. I'm not quite sure the proper title for the medical journal report or the paper, that coerced consent is actually worse than no consent. So there are difficulties and challenges there. So that's as far as I'd like to go with that now. It's something that I'd need to spend more time considering, but it is an issue, and there are potential problems around that for both employee and employer. So that's as far as I can respond to that particular question.
Okay. So maybe this case will go on some more questions that I have. Because this is PCR, but also now we have the vaccines coming down the pipe. So someone was suggesting in the workplace situation a following approach. Maybe you can kindly say what you think about it. As the employer to sign the liability in case the employee will be injured by the job enforced by the employer, because that's what seems to be the case pretty soon. Agree to the vaccine providing the employee will be tested at the expense of the employer, of course, for potential sensitivity to every ingredient disclaimed in the vaccine by the manufacturer. As we can expect, no doctor probably will do or sign off on such tests in fear of consequences. So what do you think about that kind of approach?
Yeah, well, I agree. I think, it's an interesting question and a novel approach to this situation. I mean, and it's another question that I would need to consider in much more detail, because it's actually a very complex legal situation, legally speaking. Because, for example, how can an employer do something like this without risking his or her insurance cover? And I'm just going back to my previous career and experience there in light of my training as a lawyer. And, there can be all kinds of difficulties there in terms of insurance. Would your insurer give you cover in the event that something happened? Let's say, for example, the employer signs off a letter saying, yeah, I'll cover you for this. That's fine. And that employee suffers adverse drug reaction in the short term, or indeed in the long term. That can come back to bite or haunt the employer at a later date, and the company concerned, or the employer, if it's a sole trader, could find that he or she or the company is in serious difficulty because their insurer is not going to cover them. So there are there are potential problems there for an employer doing that, and I can't see the doctors doing that. Well, you know, the manufacturers, the vaccine manufacturers, have been given blanket immunity from liability,
Exactly.
and that does not bode well for faith in their own product. So if you go back to the pandemics, there were, I think, 100 cases going through the Irish courts, and some of them settled recently, as far as I'm aware, in respect of
Just
Glaxo's. Yeah. Wasn't it to do? I think it was to do with pandemics. Now, I'm open to correction on this. I need to double check, so I don't want anybody to take my word for this. I'm just speaking generally. It was the vaccine that allegedly caused narcolepsy, and I think it happened to a lot of people across Europe. And I believe there were in or about 100 potential cases in Ireland. And I understand that,
Yes.
that they were outside of court without admission of liability. So, and in that case, I know that it was GlaxoSmithKline that was involved. There was one of the defendants. And I believe, again, open to correction, I believe that they had been given immunity from liability or indemnified by the Irish government. So the taxpayer had to pay, the people who pay tax in this country had to pay the damages. And damages means, in legal terms, damages means money, compensation to the injured people. So if the manufacturer does not have faith enough in its product to give, to sign off on something, I can't see an employer or indeed a doctor doing so either. That's just my opinion based on my experience.
Okay. So another one, PCR tests and potentially vaccines being required while traveling by plane or ferry. That's another issue that people are, curious about, obviously. What is the legal basis to protect ourselves from those attempts to force people into undergoing medical procedures before exercising their right to movement or travel? Is there any point in referring to the natural law while negotiating with airport or airline staff, or once we agreed to the terms and conditions of a given airline, because they might include it, let's say the PCR test into it, we have no argument because we just, bought it and we agreed to the conditions. So what would you suggest, how should we deal with this? Because obviously everybody at some stage, even if they don't want to go for holiday, because they might give it, a miss this year, just saying, let's not fly anywhere and see how the airlines are doing without us. We might be in some cases forced to travel for, family reasons, something that we really don't have, any choice. We just need to do it. So what should we do? Because people are not willing to take vaccine, obviously, but even PCR test is quite an invasive one. And why should I be taking it, and treat it like a biohazard? So what would you suggest here?
Well, the PCR test, as I said earlier, if it's forced upon you, you cannot be forced to take it against your will. That's number one. But they're imposing it upon people in many countries across Europe, and indeed, across the world, in an indirect way. So it's an indirect way of circumventing or undermining or getting around a person's fundamental rights or constitutional rights. And I have a lot of experience with this particular issue as well, because I had a friend a friend who was traveling from I can't remember which airline. I don't want to say the name of the airline just here, but it was an airline, and the person was refused permission to fly. It was actually thrown off of the flight because of the mask issue. and the person had an underlying condition, and the airline staff wouldn't accept it, and told the person they had to get off the airplane, which left them in a very difficult situation. And so that was actually a breach of contract. You've asked me a number of questions there, so I'm just trying to keep separate the questions out of my mind. So please forgive me if I'm rambling a bit. I want to answer the questions as best as I can, and by all means interject or stop me and say, well, what about that issue about contract, Martin? What about the issue about natural rights, which is a good one to come to start on, I suppose. It's a complete waste of time to argue your natural rights or constitutional rights to somebody at the airport. And I've encountered this with clients as well who have been stopped and held against their will and prevented from going forward, been thrown out, been deprived access, permission to go onto the airplane, and so on because of the mask issue. Some people I've encountered in my practice who were falsely imprisoned, which provides them with a claim against the airline and the staff involved in the particular airport in question, coming back to Ireland from abroad. And that's a claim. That's a situation where an individual who has their rights affected in that way should contact. If they want to make a claim, they should contact a solicitor for independent legal advice. So there are many different potential causes of action that a person can have in all of these situations that are happening right now. There could be a discrimination. There could be a breach of contract. There could be a false imprisonment. There could be assault. That's happened as well with security guards attacking people or pushing people or throwing people out of a shop because they don't wear a mask. And if that person has a disability, well then, you know, there are problems there for the shop in question, as well as the security guard. But even if a person didn't have a medical exemption and was thrown out of a shop in an aggressive manner or assaulted, physically assaulted or battered, there's potentially an argument there where their rights have been violated. The right to bodily, against trespass to the person have been violated. So they've been assaulted or battered, as we would say in tort law. So yeah, coming back to the airport then. Forget about natural law. You're not talking to a lawyer for a start. And even some lawyers don't pay much heed to natural law if that's not their area of expertise. But definitely not in the airport. So if you book a flight, you're signing up into a contract. And if it's part of that contract that it's a requirement to undergo a test or that you have to wear a mask on the flight, well, you've signed up to that. And if you don't abide by those terms and conditions after you sign up to the contract or make the contract, then you're breaching the contract. So you wouldn't have a leg to stand on. Now, on the other hand, if the airline allows you to make a booking and you pay your fee and your ticket, your fare, and then afterwards they say, well, okay, we've decided now that if you have to wear a mask, then we want you to take a test. Well, if that wasn't part of the original contract, then they can't change the contract after it's been entered into, and that would provide the passenger with grounds for a claim for breach of contract on the part of the airline. So they should seek legal advice in relation to something like that. But there was a case recently which was very important, and it was a lawyer in the Netherlands, Dutch lawyer, who brought a claim on behalf of his wife and child, daughter. They were on holidays in Zanzibar, and when they were coming back to the Netherlands, the Dutch government had made a decision that it was a requirement to undergo the PCR test before the person would be allowed back into the country. So this lawyer brought a case in the Netherlands and won because it was seen to be an unjust infringement on the citizen's right to travel or to re-enter her home country or their home country. But I think the Dutch government may have changed the law after that. So remember what I said back at the start of the interview, that the government under the Constitution have been given the power to make law. The legislature has the power to make law, so they can make any law that they see fit to make, and that's what they've been given the power to do. It doesn't make the law right. It doesn't make it morally right. They've been given the power to do that, and if you want to challenge that, you'd have to go to court, or it'd have to be challenged in some other way through the democratic process. But that's an interesting question that you raised, and that's an interesting case that occurred just not too long ago. I can't remember when. I think it was about a week or so ago in the Netherlands. So.
Can we clarify if the passenger actually needed to undergo the testing and then he sued, or he didn't undergo?
I'm not sure of the full facts. Yeah, I don't know the full facts, but I think she protested and didn't refuse to undergo the test. You cannot be forced to undergo any kind of medical intervention against your will, and. But there can be all kinds of difficulty if you don't comply, as we all know. If you don't comply with the regulations or the requirements or the guidelines, there can be all kinds of difficulty for a person. And sometimes people just go along with the guidelines because they don't want any trouble, or they can't afford to to hire a lawyer to represent them and so on. But in this particular case, I understand that the lady and her daughter were returning home from holidays, and they were demanded to undergo a test, and I believe that they refused, and they got into trouble, as far as I know. And their husband, who's a lawyer, brought a case to court, a claim to court, and challenged it and won. So, for example, let's say in Ireland or in the United Kingdom, somebody got a fine. Let's say they got an on-the-spot fine, and they decide, no, I'm going to challenge this. I'm not going to pay it. And I believe that if you don't pay it, you could go to court. So if you go to court, you have the possibility of challenging that and challenging the legislation. Now it's not something to be taken lightly, and it's something that people should always seek independent legal advice to do. But it's open to people. It's open to anyone to challenge the law or challenge any fine or charge like that, and to defend themselves if they want to do so. And but it's something that they certainly should take legal advice on before they decide to do something like that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so I have Aga.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify the tiny little thing. So you can go on. I also need to tell you that we have quite a lot of questions here in the chat, so hopefully we can ask them.
Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask one particular thing that came to my mind about challenging the system as such. If I know that there is no class action as such in Ireland, but is there, for instance, a possibility to do it in a form of, for instance, one entity suing the government, like some kind of association of, let's say, particular professionals or business owners? Is there any possibility that they could just get together as one entity or under the umbrella of one entity and, start something? Or are we condemned essentially to go one by one as individual to challenge and, of course, out of our pocket and all the rest of it? So do we have any chance here or not?
Yeah, well, we don't have class actions in Ireland, as you said. They have those in the United States, Canada, and Australia. But we do have something similar, in Ireland, and it's called a representative action. Now, it's similar but different. It's like the same man in different clothes, but there are a lot of differences, and it's not, the procedure is, it allows one action to be brought to resolve issues on behalf of different parties with the same interest, so that's the representative action. And a number of people can get together, and a number of plaintiffs who have the same interest or a shared interest, and maybe spread the costs of an action if it's in relation to the same facts. Now, and also other people, a representative body can bring an action as well, but people need to be aware of and I'm sure people are aware of the problems with litigation, and the main thing is cost. Litigation, high court litigation, and something, if you wanted to challenge constitution or the law, you want to bring a constitutional challenge, that can be extremely expensive in terms of, especially if you lost. So if a person lost their case, not only do they have to pay their own legal team, but they also have to pay the legal costs for the other side. And in many cases that I've done in the past, I brought actions against, government ministers and Ireland and the Attorney General and so on, and other parties. And if the person went through all the way to trial and didn't manage to settle their case before trial, they could end up with a massive cost bill against them if they lost. So it's a huge risk. Like litigation at that level, and indeed at any level, is not to be taken lightly. And if people are ever minded to bring a case, they should always get sound, independent legal advice as to the strength of their case and the weakness of their case as well. So it's not an easy task to challenge the government on the constitutionality of a law, because you're fighting an uphill battle for a start. Because whenever the legislature make a law, there's a principle in constitutional law called the presumption of constitutionality. So there's a presumption that when our legislature, through the democratic process that has been in place for many, many years, whenever they decide to make a law, through all of the arguments and the voting and so on, through the two houses of Parliament, the Dáil and the Seanad, there's a principle, it's called the presumption of constitutionality. So the courts will look at the law, will presume that the law is constitutional because it's gone through that democratic process. Now, it's different in relation to it's easier, I should say, to challenge a regulation. That's not to say that it's going to be that it would be easy. It would be easier because it's a piece of secondary legislation, but it's still a massive challenge. So if somebody wanted to run a case like that, it would be quite difficult. They would need a very good legal team and a very good senior counsel. I'm a junior counsel. I'm like the first level barrister, and the next level up is called a senior counsel. And in the United Kingdom, it's junior counsel and a QC, or a Queen's counsel. And so if you were going to run a case, if somebody wanted to bring a case like that, they would need a very strong legal team to bring that challenge. And remember that on the other side, you're fighting against the state that has a bottomless pit of funds to defend its position. But that's not to say that people shouldn't take challenges. People have taken challenges against the state as lay litigants and won in the past. because they believed so strongly in their position, and they fought with everything that they could muster, with all of the strength that they could muster. They fought and won their cases. Merck Sharp and Dome case is one classic example of that. A farmer from Tipperary won that case in the Supreme Court without a legal fee.
I want to ask one thing, because you mentioned that there is this presumption of constitutionality, but we know that a lot of things that were introduced over last, let's say, 10 months,
yes,
they weren't really using the full-blown democracy here. There's a lot of things that is just by the stroke of a pen of a minister, and we have serious consequences for people on a daily basis. So, incomplete Doyle and all the rest of it, and they don't even discuss things properly, you have 2-3 minutes for a couple of, TDs to speak. So that's, for me, it's far away from constitutionality of any kind. Would you say that?
Yes. And that's it. And because we're in unprecedented times in relation to this, that those are principles that worked well and good when everything else was operating as per normal, when life was normal. But now we've got this abnormal situation, and there is, of course, I agree, there's a question: is it correct to presume constitutionality? Now, that's a very good question to raise, and I don't know what the answer is to that, but I would agree that it does raise a very powerful question, a very very interesting question. And there are a lot of people have strongly criticized and indeed condemned the process that has been followed over the last number of months, and indeed since this crisis began. The lack of transparency, the lack of debate, the stroke of a pen, and we've got all of these restrictions on our fundamental rights and freedoms. And in fact, there's a colleague of mine, a barrister called Michael McNamara. He's also a TD, a government the Member of Parliament, and Mr. McNamara was the chair of the COVID committee, appointed by the government to see the COVID committee. You may have heard about him, and you may have seen.
We did.
He strongly condemned the government, because when they were seeking to extend the legislation, not just for a month or 2 months. This is back in November now. There was a vote to extend the legislation, and they extended it until June of this year. And Michael McNamara said he'd been given 50 seconds to debate it or to say his piece. And I remember, I'm open to correction, but I remember him criticizing that situation, condemning it, and a number of other TDs as well. But it still went through, and I understand as well that the report, the COVID-19 report, I understand that the government now again open to correction. I believe that it wasn't read, and I find that shocking. I'm not sure if that's correct, but I'm given to understand that it is. And in that report, they had all kinds of experts. They had Professor Carl Hennigan from the University of Oxford University.
Yes.
I think it's from Oxford or Cambridge. Sorry, it could be Cambridge. And they had Lord Jonathan Sumption, who spoke out about these things. And Lord Sumption was actually one of the people that motivated me to become a little bit more attentive and to ask questions about what's going on, because Lord Sumption is regarded as one of the finest legal minds alive today. He's an incredibly well-respected former Supreme Court judge in England. He was a judge in the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, and he retired just, I'm not sure exactly when, I think it could have been 2019, not sure. But Lord Sumption was interviewed by the BBC back in March of last year, around the end of March, and he spoke about he characterized what was happening as a hysterical slide into a police state. Now, he could speak from authority because he's also an historian, apart from being a former Supreme Court judge, and as I said, widely regarded as one of the finest legal minds alive today. So as a barrister, I've been in front of many senior judges in court. And when you go into the courts and you're in front of High Court judges and Court of Appeal judges and Supreme Court judges and Circuit Court, the judges tend to be very, very measured and conservative in their language. And you'll all hear we all hear stories about colorful characters in the past, and they'll be very outspoken and so on. But as a general rule, judges in the superior courts are very measured in their language. So I really appreciate that. I can understand that. And when I heard Lord Sumption use terms like a hysterical slide into a police state, that was concerning, and it got my attention. And over the course of last summer, and indeed all throughout before Christmas, Lord Sumption has spoken on many occasions and strongly criticised the approach of the government. And at one stage, he called it, I think, a government by decree. And the government by decree would be like just orders being dictated rather than going through, bypassing the democratic process, as you were saying, and just the stroke of a pen. And so that's not to be respected in a democratic society. In fact, it's not part of a democratic society, and it shouldn't be. When so much is at stake, and when so much harm can befall the country because of the measures taken, I think the government across Western democracies have an obligation to ensure that all sides of a debate are heard fully, and that at a time like this, when the country is faced with a crisis for whatever reason, whether it's a government approach or whether it's a disease, it should be open to the utmost scrutiny, and to ensure that the democratic process is honoured and respected. So yes, going back to your point about the presumption of constitutionality, that does raise a serious question, because all things being equal, in normal times, yes, of course, those principles applied, and you wouldn't think twice. But of course, we're in abnormal times now, so perhaps there should be more scrutiny rather than less, and more debate rather than less.
Definitely. So before Aga will ask the questions, because there's quite a lot of questions from my viewers, I just have a very quick one that was also passed on from our fans. They are about vaccines for all living cert pupils. Can they do that? And mind you, we know that this vaccine doesn't even warrant the breaking of transmission. So
yeah. Well, the vaccine issue is a very, very controversial and hot subject. And again, I'll remind your viewers that I am not medically qualified. I cannot speak with any authority on vaccines, or the safety or the lack of safety in respect to vaccines. I can only speak in relation to the law and the issues that arise from vaccines in relation to the law. Legal issues, the liability issues, and so on. And of course, I've got my own opinions on it. I'm not anti-vax. I'm open to questioning. And I think as a human rights advocate, I would be inclined to criticize heavily anybody who attempts to label somebody an anti-vaxxer, for example, to call somebody, just because somebody questions the safety of a product, whether it's a vaccine or whether it's a car or whether it's a hairdryer or an electric iron, or any kind of a drug, if a person wants to question the safety of that product, that person, in my opinion, has a right to question that, and should not be labeled a derogatory or derisory term such as an anti-vaxxer or a conspiracy theorist or some nonsense like that. People have a right to question and should question. In fact, I think it's dangerous to accept things blindly without asking questions. Yes, sir, no, sir, 2 bags full, sir. I don't think that's conducive to safety and health and well-being, in my humble opinion. But then again, I'm not medically qualified, so I can't say one way or another. I can only speak in relation to the law and in relation to a person's right to freedom of expression and a constitutional right to express their opinion and to hold their own personal convictions and opinions. So, coming back to the issue about school, can you force a vaccine on school children? No. Children, just as the same as everybody else, have a right to bodily integrity. And there's all kinds of issues that would arise in a situation like that, in my view, from a legal perspective. There would be issues in relation to, number one, the right to bodily integrity. Issue 2, the right to education. What are going to be the consequences for students who refuse to undergo or to take a jab? No jab, no education. No jab, no school.
We have it in Australia.
Yeah, well, that doesn't make it right, as I said, and I'm not sure about the situation in Australia. I can speak to that, but yeah. So unless somebody challenges it, if the government wants to introduce that, they will go ahead and introduce it. But from a legal perspective, I can only say that there are potential grounds to challenge that. And is it needed? Is it warranted? Are there more risks? Like, what are the risks? Is this product safe? Are there sufficient long-term safety studies? Do you believe what the manufacturer says blindly and accept it? These are all legitimate questions. And I think for anybody to suppress questioning and seeking answers to those questions is exposed to being accused of breaching a person's right to fully informed consent, right to freedom of information, to receive information and to impart information. And it would also trespass upon the principle of informed consent, which has been in existence for thousands of years. It's one of the cornerstones of medical treatment, that a person should be fully informed within reason as to the safety of the product that that they're going to put into another person's body. So yeah,
absolutely. Okay, fire away with some questions from our viewers.
Okay, so I'll start with the oldest questions, and I know we talk about the airlines, but there was a question about the requirement of undergoing a PCR test when arriving in Ireland, and it's not on behalf of the airline, but the Irish government.
Yeah, well, that's similar to the situation in Holland or in the Netherlands. So let's say Peter is, let's say, for example, one of your viewers from Poland originally, been living in Ireland for a long time, perhaps has gained Irish citizenship at this stage or whatever, now an Irish citizen, or I don't know if we've got joint citizenship in Poland. My wife is actually Latvian, so I understand the situation there in terms of citizenship.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, it is possible. Yeah.
Let's say that Peter goes to Warsaw, and he's coming back to Ireland, and he's confronted with this this test. I'm only speculating here. I don't know the situation yet. I haven't seen I haven't read the legislation involved. If there is legislation on that, I know that this is something that they've been talking about very recently, and I haven't had an opportunity to read it and consider it yet. But I'm just this is all hypothetical, and I'm just speaking in general. So don't take anything, as I said, don't take anything I say as legal advice here. It's not. But yeah, so if Peter is confronted with this situation coming back into Ireland, I think there are issues there, legally issues in relation to, well, lawful issues in relation to the person's right to return home, to travel back into his Ireland is now his home. Of course, Poland is his second home or another home, but he's returning to Ireland as an Irish citizen or as an Irish permanent resident here. An EU citizen. There are issues there in relation to that. I can see. As I said again, you cannot be forced to undergo a test if you do not want to. But I believe, from recollection, that the government could be imposing a fine for anybody that doesn't undergo this test. So that could be a situation where a person, if they felt aggrieved by that they might want to challenge it. So if they got into trouble by coming back and decided, no, I'm going to stand my ground, I'm going to challenge this. Like I said before you do anything like that, always seek independent legal advice before you get a criminal charge against you, or even result in a criminal conviction. So it's very, very important to get independent legal advice in relation to specific issues like that. But I can see some legal some issues there from a legal perspective. Number one, in relation to the right to bodily integrity, informed consent as well is another issue that arises. But if the government have passed regulations, that is the law, and if it's a legal requirement, then you can fall foul of the law if you refuse to comply with it. But then again, somebody might want to challenge that, and they might want to make a stand, and therefore they're entitled to bring a challenge in court, or to defend that in court if they wish to, and on the basis that, in their opinion, if this goes too far, it's a disproportionate infringement upon their fundamental rights. And that goes back to what I said earlier on about the proportionality. So there's no point in arguing proportionality with police or with the airline crew or ground crew or cabin crew or anybody like that. It's a waste of time. You can argue within reason. For example, a person has a medical exemption that exempts them from wearing a face mask. You can show that if you want. You don't have to show it. There's no legal requirement or obligation to show your proof of medical exemption, but it's a wise idea to have it. It's actually a contractual issue on some airlines that I've seen. They require you to show evidence of your exemption, but that's a contractual issue. It's also questionable as well in terms of putting perhaps an unfair onus on a person with a disability. So, I need to think about that further, but there's a possible argument there to be made in that regard. But yes, it seems to be getting more severe as these alleged case numbers or positive test results increase. The restrictions seem to be increasing more and more as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, Aga, anything else that you see interesting?
Yeah,
I'm sure there's
we
plenty.
have a basic question here though. Are lockdowns and shutting down businesses actually constitutional? Are they legal?
Yeah, are lockdowns legal? Well, the government have decided to do it. The government is in charge of the country. People have voted for them. They're in power and they're in control. It's their decision to do what they decide is best for the good of society. And if people don't like it, They can bring a challenge to court to challenge the constitutionality of any measures that have been signed into law. There are cases running around the world at the moment in relation to this particular issue. As I said, Tom Renz in Ohio is bringing a number of cases, one in Ohio, and I'm not sure of the other states. There's another case, well, and they're in relation to the right to earn a livelihood as well. You have a constitutional right, we all have, recognized under the Constitution and guaranteed and protected under the Constitution. And if that right is disproportionately affected if a person believes or feels and they've received advice that their right to earn a livelihood has been unfairly or disproportionately affected, they can bring it, they may have grounds to bring a claim or challenge to court. But like I said, many people have said to me that this is an entirely disproportionate response to the threat posed. Some people have called it you don't crack an egg with a hammer, or you don't use a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. And it seems to be, in many respects, it could turn out to be worse than the disease that it's supposed to cure. And in fact, there are many world-renowned experts saying that the lockdowns don't work. They don't. I know that Ivor Cummins, for example, is quite marvelous with data, and has created some very educational and informative videos and presentation in respect of mortality. And I believe that there's something in the region of at least 22 peer-reviewed scientific papers demonstrating, or showing that lockdowns do not provide a benefit. In fact, they could actually cause more harm. And as I said earlier on as well, Governor Cuomo in New York has announced the other day that perhaps the cost is far greater than the benefit. But like I said as well, if what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has said is correct, that there are 10,000 children dying every month in Africa because of the lockdown measures across the world, I don't think that the lockdowns would last for a week or a month or a week in any Western democracy if that were the situation in any of our so-called developed countries. So that's informative.
Exactly. So maybe the problems with the vaccine down the line will kind of sort us that issue. Instead of those kids, there will be the injuries and stuff. That might be the case. I just wanted to ask Aga. Will continue with questions because I got my kind of private line here, and there was one question that I didn't think of, but didn't think of for today's program. But this is something that I think a lot of people is a little bit worried in relation to the Health Act, that improved one from March 2020, and there is a part to the document about detention and what have you. Now, do you think that this is feasible? That ramping up those numbers, coming up with new versions of viruses, whether they have in mind out there, and they might have an argument like this. Is it possible they might start, suspecting people of COVID, detecting them, isolating them, vaccinate them, or treating them, against their will? Are we actually physically possibly may face this kind of situation? Because the law is there, right? And usually if you come up with some idea in the legislature, you want to use it, or you predict that you might be needing it. So how should we understand that kind of draconian, I don't know, quasi-concentration camps, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, well, the law is there, and it has been there. But I'm familiar with what you're saying, and we're speculating at the moment, and of course that's okay. We're speaking hypothetically in a possible situation, but let's just say that a terrible disease swept across the land, faraway land, and that disease was making people really sick, and people were falling like flies, dying, and it was out of control. And people were just, hospitals couldn't cope, morgues couldn't cope. There's just, bodies were piling up on the streets. It was a terrible, terrible disease. Well, in a situation like that, where it's just a horrendous disease and it's demonstrable, in other words, it's clear that this is a highly infectious, deadly disease that is killing people left, right, and center. In a situation like that, that could potentially justify detaining somebody who was obviously highly infectious and for his or her own sake and for the sake of other people, to protect the society. But that's an extreme situation. That's a situation where I think anybody reasonably would say, well, my God, unless we take these drastic measures, half of the population will be wiped out by this plague. But I don't think anybody with a functioning critical faculty can say that about what's happening in our country at the moment, or in any country in the Western world. Because if you go back to, and I'm just speaking again, people can check this out for themselves. Don't take my word for it. People can check out for themselves the all-cause mortality and look back over the previous years and to see, did more people die in 2020 than in 2019 or 2018 or 2017, or has it been pretty much the same? And I'm given to understand, I'm open to correction, but I'm given to understand that there hasn't been an increase, or indeed anything that can be considered a significant increase in deaths compared to previous years. So how could anybody possibly justify forcing a vaccination on somebody, and especially in the circumstances where people have raised concern, not just lay people, scientists, doctors, medical experts have voiced grave concern over the vaccine and how rapidly it was brought through to market, and it hasn't, to the best of my knowledge, well, it hasn't. It's out there in the public domain. It hasn't gone through any long-term safety studies. There's no long-term safety data available, as far as I know. Now, correct me if I'm wrong.
Of course, of course.
You know.
No. You are correct. You are correct. But Martin, I would, all that you're saying is very rational. But we kind of live in quite unrational times right now, and a lot of things that are happening right now. A year ago, we wouldn't even believe they are possible. And the recent kind of drastic example was those two people arrested because they were sitting in England on a bench in some park. That just shows you the drastic measures that are being taken. So that's why I'm quite suspicious that, because this stick is there and it's been introduced on the wave of COVID, Ebola, and dangerous disease. That's why I think a lot of people is feeling very uncomfortable with this law. Because why would they introduce it, right now, if we are not dealing with Ebola kind of disease? We are dealing with an upper respiratory infection, essentially, tract infection.
I hear you, yeah.
So that's why I brought it up.
They're very legitimate and genuine concerns that people have. And it goes back. I mentioned Lord Sumption earlier, and I have a little quote that I'll just read from so that I get it correct. And as I said, he said back in March of last year, he said, this is a hysterical slide into a police state. And he also said, quote, an irrational overreaction driven by fear. And I said earlier as well, I think anybody would agree that, you know, when fear comes in the door, reason jumps out the window, and we can't think straight when we're afraid, and people tend to strike out, and that's a problem in our society at the moment. People are so afraid that they become angry at other people. For example, somebody who's not wearing a mask, or somebody who's walking on the street or in the park, and they're not wearing a mask, and somebody who's so afraid of their own shadow because of all of the media hype and this constant barrage of fear porn, this repetition over and over and over, which is disgraceful. The media in this country, in our Western countries, should be ashamed of themselves. Now, I'm sorry if I'm not sorry. I'm saying this as a human rights advocate, that the media in this country and in every Western democracy should be ashamed. I'm talking about mainstream media, because the media has a very privileged place and a very important role to play in respect of human rights, and they have disregarded that duty, that obligation, that respected position in society to be a watchdog for human rights, to be a watchdog. They're not watchdogs anymore, as far as I can see. They've become lapdogs. I've heard a person say in the past, it was a phrase used, I think, back in the 50s, that journalists should treat the government with the same respect as a dog treats a lamppost. I don't mean that they should be discourteous or disrespectful, but you get the idea that they should challenge.
Yes.
But we're not seeing that now. That's a breach of, as I go back again, it's a breach of the fundamental right of freedom of expression. And the media has received money in this country. It's out there in the public domain to promote, a particular narrative. And the question arises from that: is that in the common good? There's a phrase that's used a lot: the common good is for the common good. But is it in the common good that we only hear, or the public only hear, one side of a story, and people who try their utmost best, who have probably no vested interests, no pony in the parade, no skin in the game, those people risk their careers and their professional reputation by trying to do what they believe is the right thing to do, by speaking out? And I've said it before. I've said it at a talk in Copenhagen. I question people. It's not a question of why am I speaking out because I'm a human rights lawyer. The question is, why aren't you? So why aren't other professionals speaking out? Well, I know everybody has their own situation and their own concerns, but we're living in very, very bizarre times. We have to look after each other. We have to protect. Nobody would say otherwise, that we must protect the most vulnerable people in our society. Of course, but perhaps there's a different way. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't kill the patient with the cure. It destroys society. Yes. And I'll just read one more thing from Lord Sumption, if you don't mind, if it's okay, if we have time.
Yes.
He said, "This is the worst interference with personal liberty in our history. And for what is, by historical standards, not a very serious pandemic, except for particular categories of vulnerable people who can isolate themselves voluntarily." I think that ties in with what we're talking about and what you said about the situation. Is it a pandemic? Well, the WHO actually changed the definition of pandemic. I think it was in 2009.
Yes, that is true.
Rainer Fulmick is actually challenging that particular issue. It's not based on deaths anymore, but apparently on the prevalence of disease. And they're basing their prevalence of disease using this test, quote unquote. This this tool, the PCR, RT-PCR, so-called test, which is being disputed by many lawyers across the world in legal challenges, including Dr. Rainer Fulmick. So they're using that to perpetuate the notion of a pandemic. So if those tests were stopped in the morning, the question is then, would we see any evidence of a pandemic? You know, back in the old days, before 2009, before the WHO actually changed the definition, the evidence would be deaths and people getting, dying because of this dreadful disease. But the question is that people should be asking, are we seeing that? And don't take my word for it. Listen to what Lord Sumption says and listen to what medical experts on the other side of the argument are saying. And of course, listen to everybody and make up your own mind. Don't take just one side of an argument.
Yes. Absolutely. I believe that the previous pandemic definition was actually doubling the cases from previously, and that was real cases, not just the test, but just people, presenting themselves with symptoms. But putting that aside now and just maybe trying to answer a few more questions, maybe a little bit shorter, if you don't mind, because we are in the third hour of our fascinating discussion. I'll just ask one question, and then Aga can, fire away with some questions from the viewers, because someone was getting into the PCR test and collecting DNA. I don't know if it is a little bit on the conspiracy theory kind of side, but let's just throw it out there for just like a quick opinion. If PRC tests collect DNA and health data, who has access to the data in Ireland or abroad? Does GDPR include DNA and health data? Is it illegal to share our health data for travel, work, or school? For example, sharing that we have a positive or a negative test with work, airline, or school. Is it something that might be controversial here with the GDPR issue?
Yeah.
We must restrict our movement for 14 days, stop working, etc., with a positive test, even though PCR test is not 100%, kind of warranting the disease, really. So is it legal? And what do you think about this particular DNA data being collected?
DNA, and there are all kinds of conspiracy theories out there, and conspiracy theory is not something that I don't like that term, because people who don't want to discuss thorny or prickly issues tend to put a label on it. Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. So that absolves of the duty or obligation to support their position. Okay, but the DNA issue, yes, I've heard. I can't speak with authority on this, but I've heard and read certain information about this and the possibility of governments sharing DNA. I think in the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, I'm not sure, I can't say for sure, and I don't want to mislead anybody by saying something that's completely incorrect, and I would, wouldn't want to do that. So as far as DNA is concerned, that would constitute, in my opinion, your personal data, and that's protected, is given protection under the General Data Protection Regulation and the Data Protection and Privacy Law as well. So if information is collected, there are certain obligations that the authorities must comply with, and they can only hold on to that information for a very limited period of time, which I think maybe 14 days, if it's in relation to a test. I'm not sure, I'm open to correction on all of this. But yeah, DNA can constitute personal data. and there are issues there, and you're protected. People's personal data is protected under the General Data Protection Regulation. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes. So, do we know, by the way, where is it being collected, or are you saying that they should just
Oh,
like
well,
disperse
yeah.
that after 14 days or something?
Yeah, well, data. Let's say your health results. The test, your medical information in respect of a test, that can only be retained for a certain period of time, not indefinitely. So I'm not sure whether or not the authorities or anyone is collecting DNA. I don't know. I've heard rumors, and I've read certain questions in relation to that, but I can't say for sure. Now, that would raise questions, of course, because in order to get and use a person's personal data, there must be a lawful basis for doing it, and they must. Well, one of the main requirements is consent, to get the person's consent, and there are obligations under the GDPR that whoever is seeking that personal data, they're obliged to follow those requirements. Otherwise, they're acting illegally and or unlawfully. Could be breaching a person's privacy as well. So yeah, there's certainly issues there.
That's
good. Would be highly suspect if people are attempting to build up a database of DNA to use for whatever purposes. So that
would be good. Okay. Yeah, Aga, far away.
Okay, so a viewer asked another basic question of how long certain things, like for how long a period of time can a government enforce things? And if we're talking about wearing masks and we take into consideration the fact that there aren't any proofs that masks actually help, how long can the government enforce, this rule of masks wearing?
The government can enforce it as long as they want, until somebody challenges it, either in court or by other means. And they will keep doing it until they decide not to do it. It's as simple as that. So if people want to challenge it, and it's open for people to challenge these measures, they can bring an action to court, provided they've got merit, and provided they've got the case has merit, and they have evidence to back up their position, and they get legal advice, proper legal opinion as to the strengths and weaknesses of their case. Yeah, it's open for them to do it. There are other ways of doing it throughout history. If you read the history books, people who don't like certain approaches taken by governments throughout history people have taken all kinds of approaches, which I would, people have a right to protest. People have a right to peaceful assembly, but in current circumstances, all of the rights have been restricted. People can't protest now; they can't gather, otherwise to face a fine. So it's it's not an ideal situation in terms of democracy or freedom or a free society. In fact, it's quite concerning that we're in a situation like that, based on the evidence that one side presents to the exclusion of the other side, and to the suppression and censorship of the other side. Yeah, but people have done other things in the past, and I would never consider. What was I going to say? I would never condone any approaches that are unlawful. People should always stay within the law in whatever approach that they want to take. So raise hell peacefully and lawfully.
So either the government stops enforcing the law, or it gets challenged in the courts, and then the courts decides, or the third option, peaceful protesting.
Peaceful protest, but that's very difficult at the moment. How do people actually protest? If they wanted to protest, how do they protest? And it's interesting as well in the current circumstances. I know that Robert F. Kennedy visited Berlin back in August. I was actually in Latvia at the time, and I watched it live. And the media, and I know I have a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues, a lot of lawyers in Germany, and a lot of friends in Germany who actually attended the, it was the largest demonstration, I believe, in history. I'm not sure, I wasn't there, but I can judge with my eyes to the massive crowd that was present in Berlin. And some reports indicate that there was 1 million or 1.5 million people. But the media, the mainstream media, put out the notion that there was something like 17,000 or 20,000. Anybody with a working brain would see, just from the photographs, there's much more. Mainstream media,
around 2 million, I guess. Or, well, some people say it was like between 10 and 5, but then they corrected and they said maybe like 1.5 million, 2 million. So that's where we ended up.
Absolutely massive people from all over Europe.
Yeah, but
so that was very peaceful, I believe, as well. So
let's get to some more questions, because I want my viewers till midnight.
Okay, a specific question now. As an sonographer, can I tell a patient at work, about my negative opinion about the vaccines? Can an employer give me a warning because of this?
What is that? As a what? I missed what you said at the start.
As an sonographer, I admit I don't know what that is. I think it's a medical profession.
Yeah, well, I can't give advice in relation to specific circumstances. I can only speak generally.
Okay.
I'm not allowed. I'm not to do. My regulations forbid me from doing that, so I can't. I'm sorry, but what I can do is I can speak generally that if I'm an employee in a particular organization, and I'm obliged to follow company policy and so on and so forth, I could get into difficulty with my employer if I undermine my employer's company policies or whatever the policies are in that organization. So any employee who's in a situation like that would need to be very careful. Otherwise, they could get into difficulty with their employer and face perhaps disciplinary action. So disciplinary procedures in the workplace. So people need to be careful. Everyone has a right to their.
It might be a situation like, for instance, with the technician radiologist. They are doing the test, right? But they are not allowed to comment on it, and they need to send the pictures to the consultant, and only he that person is allowed to give an opinion. So I suppose it might be a similar situation where, unless you are maybe you're not supposed to be expressing certain views.
Exactly, because when you're at work, you're paid for your time to be there, and you can have your own opinions, of course, but perhaps it's not the ideal situation to be expressing those opinions that might go against company policy while you're on your employer's time. Outside of work, perhaps, but even in some situations, people have, I've encountered it in my practice where people have run into difficulty by expressing their opinions outside of their workplace and then get into trouble at work. So it's like walking a tightrope. People have to make their own minds up in the situation. But if they run into difficulty, go and seek independent legal advice. If you can't afford the lawyer, I know lawyers are expensive. So you can go seek free legal FLAC, Free Legal Advice Centre, or from the Workplace Relations Commission, or from the Irish Equality and Human Rights Commission. So people can get free advice there. But people need to use their head, use their discretion. God gave you a brain, so use it. and apply some common sense to each situation, and just otherwise you don't attract trouble to yourself.
Okay, another question about NEFET. Hello, Martin. I had a pleasure meeting. I cannot see the end of this unbelievable torture. I read all the newest scientific journals regarding COVID-19 and vaccination. Has NEFET ever heard of these?
NEFET, I haven't a clue. I don't know what they're at, and in fact, I'm not alone in that. A lot of people don't know what NEFET have read or haven't read, because a lot of the well, again, I'm open to correction, but are they as transparent as they should be? I don't know. That's a lot of people question that. So my answer is I don't know what they've read and what they haven't read, and I would like to think that anybody who has such a powerful position and role in our country has access to and seeks to inform themselves of the views of all sides in a debate rather than just one. So I would like to think that they're doing that, but that's open to debate at the moment. And my answer is I don't know whether they are or not.
Another one. In the UK, there are badges attached to clothing stating that a person must not wear a mask. Can a similar solution be applied in Ireland?
I haven't heard that one before. There are badges that a person can wear.
A badge stating that one mustn't, probably because of the medical exemption, wear a mask. Could a similar solution be applied here?
Personally, that reminds me of a certain period in history where people were designated a particular identification mark. Personally, I find that distasteful, unnecessary. But people are free to do that if they want. If they choose to do that, well and good. If they want, yeah. You don't. If you've got a disability, you don't have to prove that by having a badge or a doctor's letter to anybody on the street or anybody in a shop. If you, Kasia, went into a shop and let's say you've got a disability and you're unable to wear a mask, the only thing that a shop the actual under legislation is the responsible person. That could be the manager or the person in charge of the store. The only thing that they can do under the legislation, the only power that they've been granted, is to advise you of the requirement to wear a mask and to encourage you to do so. Full stop. Nothing else. They cannot say to you, if you don't wear a mask, you're out. Get out. If you so you've got an exemption. Oh, show it to me then. Let me see it. Ha ha ha.
I'm afraid it's not the case in the US though, because the business owner have a right to refuse. So in the US it looks different, but in Ireland?
No, not even in the US, as far as I know. I'm not qualified in US law, but there is disability legislation in the United States as well. So a shop in Ireland or a business in Ireland can refuse entry to anyone it wants, so long as it doesn't break the law in doing so. If I'm running my factory and I see an African person walking into my factory and I say, excuse me, we don't accept people like you in here, leave. I would be open, quite rightly, to ridicule for discrimination on race grounds, which is deplorable. It's to be condemned. Oh, you can't come in here because you're German. You can't come in here because you're a man, or you're a gay man, or a gay woman. That's despicable. That's discrimination on grounds of gender or sex, sexual orientation. The shop can, if it wants, or a business premises can exclude anybody it wants from the premises for whatever reason it wants, but it must do so lawfully. And in the United States as well, I believe
we tried many times. We've been nearly kicked out, and the police was nearly called on us many times.
Yeah, well, in Ireland, for what you can do here is you can rely on the equal status legislation, equal status acts, and if you're discriminated against on grounds of race, nationality, or gender, and so on, or just disability in relation to the mass, then you can make a complaint to the. I know it sounds counterintuitive or confusing, but you bring your complaint to the Workplace Relations Commission. They have an equality complaint process there. So if a person suffers discrimination in a shop or a business premises, they can file a complaint there for free. They don't need to hire a lawyer. They can hire a lawyer if they want, but
Okay.
they won't be able to recover costs for that. Yeah.
Do they have an option to follow up on this complaint? And is there any time frame that they are obliged to stick to?
Yes, there is a time frame, and that time frame is, let's say Peter is going into a shop today, and Peter suffers from a disability. He cannot wear a mask, and he is thrown out of the shop and told that he can't come back in there again unless he wears a mask. Well, that's a clear case of discrimination. Peter can make a complaint to the Workplace Relations Commission, but what he would have to do, first of all, and he would have to send a complaint to the shop or the business concerned, first of all. And he must do that within 2 months of the incident. So there is a time frame. Now, the law can change, and it's in a constant state of flux. The law is very dynamic, so it's always advisable for people to check out the law as it stands at the moment. So if a person encounters a difficulty, they should contact Workplace Relations Commission for up-to-date information in respect of any discrimination complaints that they have, and to find out what the procedure is. But to the best of my knowledge, the procedure is that you make a complaint to the business in the first instance and try to resolve it amicably. Before you complain, going back to what I said earlier on, try and resolve it in a friendly manner by explaining your situation. And if you're met with abuse or harassment, then turn up the heat by all means. You have every right to do so. You have a right to have your rights respected, and no one has a right to discriminate against you on any of the grounds set out in law. So
actually, if I may share,
I
here
have just one more thing to qualify.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to qualify the shop.
Yes.
Is there a time frame for them to answer before you going to a next step, which is that commission?
Once you send your complaint to the shop, you must send your complaint in within 2 months of the incident. You send your complaint setting out what it is that you're complaining about. You don't have to give too much detail about you don't have to disclose what your condition is. You can just say, I suffer from a disability, and so on. But you'd set out your complaint and ask them to remedy it or address it or to rectify it immediately. And if they don't respond or don't provide the person with a satisfactory response within 1 month, I believe, you need to check this with the WRC, but I believe it's 1 month, then you can file your complaint with the Workplace Relations Commission and have it, it's called adjudicated upon, decided. An equality adjudicator will decide whether you are to win or not. And an adjudicator, and if any businesses out there should be aware of this, I'm a former businessman. I would not run the risk that my employees would be so stupid as to discriminate against people with disabilities and expose my business to a potential award of up to €15,000. I think that would be stupid of me, a very poor business decision to make, to fail to train my employees and to fail to educate them to respect people who come into my business and treat them with the courtesy and respect that they deserve as human beings.
I just wanted I just wanted to share because when we tried that in one of the shops here, supermarkets, we actually fell a victim, and all the other customers, of a very subtle manipulation and a propaganda. Because as soon as we communicated that, the lady went to her manager and she, insisted on calling the police. So we just quickly went through the cashier, so to get our stuff and get the hell out of there. But when we were doing that, one of the staff, I suppose she was sent by the management. She stood like in the middle and she started saying aloud, so we heard and all the other people could hear, "I have a medical condition and I am wearing a mask." And she kept repeating that because that's the excuse we use, and she was trying to justify that even though she has a medical condition, she would still wear a mask. And I was like, what does it have to do with me?
That's up to her to do that, to
yeah,
decide.
but do you understand? She was trying to convey this message that even though you may think you're medically exempt, you still have to wear the mask. Come on.
No, you don't. The law requires masks in a shop unless you've got a reasonable excuse. And all is required is a reasonable excuse. You don't necessarily have to have a medical exemption. You have to have a reasonable excuse. That's all the law requires. And they cannot enforce that upon you. It's especially they cannot enforce that if you have a disability. If you have a disability and they refuse to provide you with service or provide you access to a shop, then they're breaking the law. And there are other issues as well, not just discrimination. Under the Equal Status Acts, you've got harassment and victimization. So let's say they treat you, discriminate against you, say, no, I'm not serving you. I want you to show me proof. That could constitute harassment. And that could provide grounds for aggravated damages at an adjudication. And also, say you return to the shop at a later date, and they let you, they serve you, but when you come back to the shop, they treat you differently because you made a complaint about your disability, because of the way they treated you because of your disability. That can constitute harassment and victimization, which are also forbidden under equality legislation. So the shops need to be, businesses need to be very careful. Otherwise, they're exposing themselves to damages awards.
It's a very It's a very good advice, actually. Information as to how to proceed. I think it clarifies a lot now for people that what is the procedure and how they guess it in such situations, because as far as we know, there's quite a lot of such situations, and these are the main situations and complaints that we hear from people. It's mainly the shops, and then of course the situations in the workplaces. Now I have one particular case here that we really didn't touch on, so if I can just quickly read this question, because it relates actually to the most vulnerable people in that whole pandemic. So we have a question in particular related to residents of nursing homes and the vaccine. According to HSE and the person that asked it, they gave the source of that regulation. There is something that HSE says in regards to that. No other person such as family member, next of kin, friends or carrier, and no organization can give or refuse consent in vaccination on behalf of an adult person who lacks capacity to consent unless they have a specific legal authority to do so. So does it stand, the person is asking, what about people with dementia or impaired intellectual capacities? Because the next of kin consent was required while vaccinating nursing homes residents during the last pandemic, the swine flu, in 2009. Did something change in this area? And this is a question from a person who knows that environment very well, because they simply work there in such a nursing home.
Yeah, well, that's a very, very interesting question. and a very serious issue, complex issue, I'd need to consider that very carefully. So in order to give a specific view on it. So I'll just speak generally. I would be very concerned about consent being taken away from next of kin in situations like that, where a person in a care home has lacks the capacity to make a decision for themselves. So why people are, it's open for people to get the proper legal power of attorney or legal follow the legal procedure in order to be able to provide the consent or to speak on behalf of a person who lacks capacity. But in current circumstances, that could prove difficult. But it raises concerns as to the legal issues around taking consent away from the family, and then, well, who provides the consent? And are they respecting informed consent then to the person who lacks capacity? Who makes the decision? Does the HSE make the decision? I don't know. I'd need to look into that further. So I'm sorry I can't be any clearer than I am, because I know I'm probably not been very clear in this particular issue, because I'd need to see and read into the facts more. But I think in general that if a person lacks capacity, that's a matter for their next of kin. I think that there's an argument there to be made that it's for the next of kin to decide. But the next of kin would, of course, cannot speak on behalf of somebody unless they've got a power of attorney. Beg your pardon, it's getting late. A power of attorney. Power of eternity.
Power of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, just a few more questions, and I think we can wrap it up. SHE confirmed in writing that they have no proof that COVID-19 exists. Can we sue NPHET politicians?
I don't know. I've heard that rumor going around as well. Most people have. It's been all over social media, and I don't know. I haven't seen the evidence of that, but certainly, if that were the case, there'd probably be grounds for suing certain individuals, of course.
What about Boots? Somebody's asking about Boots because it's a pharmacy, and is that legal if they don't want to serve you because you're not wearing a mask?
Yeah, hi, Rafael. Of course. Boots, this applies right across the board. Any business premises, any indoor business premises, or any shop, it's all covered by the regulation. So, yeah, if you've got a medical exemption or disability and you're refused access to that shop, then you probably have grounds to make an equality complaint. So just the same as a supermarket or a greengrocer or a electronics phone store or anything.
A question concerning a parent in a nursing home. What if the son wants to give a consent, but the daughter doesn't agree? So the children of the person in the nursing home are disagreeing on whether the person should get vaccinated or not.
Well, the ultimate decision in relation to any medical procedure, vaccination or otherwise, the ultimate decision is for the person, the patient, to make. It's their decision. Other people cannot make decisions for them, except in situations where the patient lacks capacity, is suffering from some condition where they're of unsound mind, as we say in law. They lack capacity to make decisions for themselves. But in a situation like that, it is a requirement. If a next of kin wants to make a decision on behalf of their family member, they must have a power of attorney to do so. And they should get legal advice in relation to that issue. But if it's a son, a brother and a sister, for example, that will all fall down to who decides or who has the power of attorney, if they can decide on that. But I've encountered that in my practice before, where people have fallen out with family members because they cannot agree. One person says no, they should have the vaccination. Another person says no, they shouldn't have that vaccination or that medical treatment, and then they fall out with each other, and there's no decision made. So what happens in a situation like that? So yeah, they have to try their best to come to a decision as a family and get a power of attorney. So then they can.
Okay. 3 more questions. If a manufacturer is exempt from liability for the product, meaning vaccines, does it mean that the government and our tax money are used to pay for the compensation of people who suffered injuries as a result of using a product, meaning vaccine, I guess?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's not an easy task. If you bring a claim against any big corporation or state, it's likely that they will fight vigorously to oppose you and try to wear you out. And but finally, most cases that go to court actually settle. In other words, they're resolved before going to trial. So whenever you bring a case to court, you never know how it's going to turn out if you go all the way through to trial. So that tends to encourage people to settle their case before it goes to court. But I've seen from the past in relation to large corporations or indeed the state, they can just wait till the last minute and then decide. A lot of cases can be decided on the steps of the court on the morning of the hearing, So that's what you're up against there.
And a question from Marzena. Would you, Martin, consider reviewing my official documents written regarding non-consent form for wearing a mask and PCR testing, please? Can I send documents to you for review?
I'm very sorry, but I can't. Well, I could if you wanted to. I can, of course, advise people, but it has to be done through a solicitor. A lot of people don't understand that a barrister cannot give advice directly to a member of the public unless through a solicitor. It's different in other countries. It's different in England. But in Ireland, if somebody wants to get the advice or the opinion of a barrister, which is a specific skilled advice, they must go to a solicitor first. And the solicitor is like going to a GP. And you go to your GP and the GP will recommend a particular specialist in a certain area. I have many specialist areas that I practice in. I've done a lot of personal injuries work and professional negligence, defamation, and so on, banking issues, and lots of different speciality areas. So if a solicitor says, well, I know that Martin, for example, or Peter, or Joan, or Mary, they specialize in a particular area, I can contact them for you and engage them on your behalf to give you an opinion. That's the way that it works. So ordinary members of the public, a barrister is not allowed to give advice directly to a member of the public. It's the way that the system works in this country, and I'm obliged to follow that. So of course, I'd be more than happy to provide advice to anyone that wants it, but it has to be done through a solicitor. And of course, if I have the expertise to deal with that particular area of law, I'd be more than happy to help you.
And the last question, do you think lawyer associations should seek a chance to stop the draconian regulations that are being imposed on us collectively?
Yeah, well, that's an issue that people don't understand as well. A lawyer, take for example a barrister. I have an obligation to be independent from any particular organization, or I'm an advocate, and my job, or a barrister's job, is to be an advocate to help in the administration of justice. And we have an obligation to act on behalf of anybody that comes to us for advice and seeks us to advocate in court. And we have an obligation to act for both sides, for either side of an argument. So, and most law firms are like that as well. A law firm cannot take an action, a group of lawyers cannot take an action to court by themselves. Lawyers, a barrister is a lawyer, a solicitor is a lawyer, a judge is a lawyer, various different types of lawyers, but they're all lawyers. A lawyer cannot bring a case just out of the blue like that. They need to have somebody, a claimant, or what we call in Ireland, in many cases, a plaintiff. It's also called a claimant as well, somebody who wants to bring a claim. So a lawyer will act on their behalf, will bring the claim to the court for them, will give them legal advice and so on. That's what lawyers do. A body of lawyers just cannot simply decide one day, oh, we're going to bring a challenge and knock down all of this. It doesn't work that way. Lawyers are there to provide legal services to members of the public or to corporations, to the state and so on. That's how it works. So if a person wants to bring a claim, they engage lawyers to act on their behalf. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
There you are.
That's great. So, Martin, I would like to ask you maybe, unless there's a question, Aga, is there any other question you see
That's pretty much
answered?
it. That's pretty much it. We already went through. Yeah.
That's been a marathon.
Yeah. So
it has, and thank you for staying with us for so long. It's been like 3 hours already.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well,
but
I hope
yeah, so essentially I wanted to maybe to sum up at the end. Again, all those organizations that you mentioned that someone can seek either advice, or you were saying some different commissions and organizations like that. So just so people have an idea, and maybe somebody can make a quick note of those names, where to go, how to start, any proceedings, if you want to just challenge the system, say in general.
Just in general, well, I'll start off, I suppose, with my advice that I can give as a human being, as a dad, as a husband, as a citizen of Europe, of the world. Always try to resolve your disputes amicably. I mean, in a friendly way, always at the start. Just because somebody's nasty to you doesn't give you the right to be nasty back. And two wrongs don't make a right. These are just wise things that in fact, my father has taught me over the years. So always try to resolve any dispute in a friendly way. It won't work out. It won't always work out, but sometimes it will. And if you can do it that way, that's certainly the best way of resolving a dispute. And you retain your relationship, and there are a lot of positives from that. But if you can't, if you're met with abuse or with violence or aggression and disrespect or discrimination, and your rights have been violated, then you have every right to seek redress, to seek compensation, or to seek to have the matter put right. And I've encountered so much since I became a barrister, and particularly in light of the current circumstances, because of all of the fear. When fear takes a hold of a person, it's very easy for that person to become angry. And anger is really fear directed outwards. So people who are angry are usually afraid of something, and they take out, the way they deal with that fear is through anger. So it's good to be aware of that and try to be calm in the situation. I know it's not easy, because we're all human beings and we can get wound up, and something can just press the wrong button. So and we go off into attack back. But always try to resolve the dispute amicably. And if you can't, then there are lots and lots of resources and bodies out there that can help and provide with information as a first step. And the first step, number one, be friendly, try and resolve it in a friendly way. Second step, there are organizations out there, for example, with the mask issue or discrimination issue on grounds of race, for example. My wife, being Latvian, has experienced racist attacks over the years. I have. I've been an immigrant, and I lived in a number of countries over the years, and I've been attacked because I'm Irish. Which, who'd want to attack me? You know, but it happens, and I know how it feels. So whether it's discrimination on grounds of your nationality or on grounds of your sex or your sexual preference or disability, that's wrong. It's illegal, and that is to be condemned. So, number one, a friendly way. Number two, there are lots of organizations out there that can provide help as a second step. For example, and you can take a note of this, the Workplace Relations Commission, the WRC. The website is workplacerelations.ie, workplacerelations.ie. And if you've got a discrimination complaint, you can contact the WRC for help. And that's the place where you would go to have your claim heard. There's also the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. It's you can contact them for free advice and guide. They won't give you legal advice. You'll always encounter that. They'll always say, "Oh, we can't give legal advice." Well, they can't. Only a lawyer, a qualified lawyer, is permitted in law to give legal advice. And always, a lot of people out there are giving legal advice and they're not legally qualified. It's actually illegal to do that. So always seek, if you need legal advice, always seek it from an independent, qualified, practicing professional. And it's just, some professionals out there don't suit everybody that comes through their door. And it's like shopping for a pair of shoes. Go around until you find somebody that you can get on with and that you click with. So those bodies don't give legal advice. They can't. They can give information. They can provide you with legal information and what your rights are and the procedures and so on. So there's the Workplace Relations Commission. There's the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. You've got, if you want free legal advice, you can go to FLAC, F-L-A-C, FLAC, free legal advice centers. You can get legal advice from those places, but you need to satisfy certain requirements in order to get legal advice for free. For example, if you're unemployed and you don't have any a lot of resources, or you can't afford legal advice, then maybe FLAC can help. Then you've got, there are various support groups out there that can provide people with information and guidance. People should always use their discretion and always make their own, get as much information as you can and then make up your own mind about it. If you're in a situation where you have been seriously abused or violated, your rights have been violated in some particular way. For example, discrimination, you can go through to the Workplace Relations Commission. You don't need a lawyer for that. You can if you want to you can get a lawyer to help you with that if you want, but you don't have to. It's for free. But if, let's say, for example, you're in a shop and a security guard or somebody assaults you, that's a violation. That's a trespass to your person. So that's can provide a person with a claim for assault, trespass to the person, or defamation. I've encountered that a lot in my practice, where people have been defamed in shops because they can't wear a mask, and they've been defamed in front of other people, and their good name and reputation has been tarnished. as a result of the way that they've been treated in the shop. So in a situation like that, it would be essential, if you wanted to bring a claim, that is, of course, you don't have to bring a claim, but if you wanted to, and if you wanted to vindicate your rights and your good name, then you should contact a solicitor in the first instance and get an opinion from a barrister afterwards, if the solicitor feels that is necessary. And then you could pursue a claim if you wanted to for assault or even false imprisonment. Some people have been held, prevented from going about their business. They've been held in a shop or in other premises. For example, I know people who were held against their will at an airport, and that was false imprisonment, and it would provide them with grounds to make a claim. They were defamed. That provides them with grounds to make a claim. But people should never run to court in the first instance, just at the start. Court should always be a last resort. And always, as I said at the beginning, I'll say it again because it's worth repeating, always try and resolve the issue, the matter, in a friendly way. So that's it. There are lots of support groups. There are bodies out there, the WRC, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, FLAC, and so on. People can get information from those organisations and assistance and guidance. And of course, citizensinformation.ie is a brilliant source of information as well. And people can get a bit of guidance there on that website, and it's updated on a regular basis. So it's a good place to go for information as well. But yeah, so I hope that I've shone some light on a very complex subject and a very challenging and worrying subject, I suppose, in light of everything that's going on. And I hope knowledge is power. And when a person is aware of their rights for a start, and aware of where they can go for help and where they can go for further information, that can provide to alleviate some of the unnecessary fear and hurt that people are experiencing at the moment. Because there's so much, I see it almost every day of the week in my practice, the hurt and despair that people are feeling, and they're so glad when they find out that there are places where they can go for help and assistance. And once a person realizes that they have a right to stand up for their rights, they don't have to just roll over and let everybody abuse them. Yeah, they can stand up and take action. And but always, in the first instance, try to resolve it in a friendly way. Get as much help as you can from all of the other bodies and resources that are available out there. And only as a last resort, you can consider legal action. But just because you go to a solicitor or get an opinion from a barrister and get the help of a barrister and advice from a counsel or a barrister, as we're called, doesn't mean that you have to go ahead with litigation either, because with your lawyers, your legal team, you could also seek to have the case or the issue resolved without having to go to court, maybe through mediation or something like that. But there are lots and lots of there's lots and lots of help for people out there. And if you go to one particular professional, for example, and they don't help you, well, that's their choice. But there are, and I've encountered that before, where people have gone to certain professionals and they were refused help in one way or another. And there are people out there. You just have to keep looking around until you find somebody that's suitable. But there is help there. Yeah. I hope that's
great.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Martin, because we passed midnight. So we would like to thank you very much for your patience and a lot of very valuable info and just simple advice as well, because sometimes people just need an advice, how to proceed, how to behave. how to tackle certain distressing situations. So that's very valuable, obviously. And I also thank our viewers for many interesting questions and the fact that they stayed with us so long, because we know it's a school night, so everybody essentially needs to go to bed and in pajama or in a full attire. So thanks very much for you being with us so long, and for our viewers to attend in great numbers. We are inviting everyone to our next program, obviously, with Justina Walker next time. And our doors is open to you, Martin, and I'm sure we probably will have some occasion in the future to talk again about legal cases, or essentially, even the progress, how those cases are doing, and are we challenging here something, or we need to put some more effort into that. And we encourage everybody to, if you can and afford it, challenge the system, because this is the way to go, I guess.
Yeah, you've every right. You've actually a right to criticize government. People don't realize the government doesn't want you to know that, but you have. We live in a democracy. We're supposed to live in a democracy, and people can express their opinions. But do law. My right
Just do
to
it
swing
peacefully and do it peacefully and cautiously.
Yeah, of course. But look, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's so nice to meet you, ladies, and I've so happy to be able to give some guidance to your viewers out there. And I have a lot of friends from Poland and in Poland, and in fact, I trained as a English teacher for students of foreign languages many years ago, many years ago, and my teacher was Polish, and he wanted us to learn Polish for a week. So that's where I learned Czech and Jak się masz, and it's about all I can remember because it's so long ago. But yeah, it's you're beautiful people from Poland, a wonderful country, and so it's been my pleasure to spend some time with you this evening. And
thank you so much, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to the next show with you.
God bless. Thank you very much.
Yes,
good night.
Definitely. And thank you. And I apologize for my mic, because it's not my mic, it's the internet. I'm getting the info that I had some problem. That's the internet, unfortunately, not my mic.
I'm sorry, we're just having technical issues, but that's usually the case.
We'll blame all the internet on the government.
Good night, everyone.
It's the big tech's fault. We know it.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you and good night. And see you guys.
Bye. Good night. Good night.